I'd like to call this regular Board of Ed meeting to order at 7 p.m. The invocation or moment of silence, Tina LeBlanc, please rise. Tonight, I'd like us to take a moment to remember Bob T. Katz. Bob T. Katz was not only a board member many years ago, he was a staple at both town council and Board of Ed meetings. Many times, I would come to the dais and find a photocopy of something going on with Enfield schools back as early as the 1930s. And he would always tell me, see that? History repeats itself. It's still the same argument today. After that, he would sit in the front row with his newspapers, eyes on the newspapers and ears on the meeting. That was all part of Mr. T. Katz's charm. At the end of the day, we always knew that Bob T. Katz loved Enfield. Let us bow our head in a moment of silence to remember Bob. The Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Bless America. God help Enfield, Connecticut. Sir.
I'd like to give a fire evacuation announcement. There's double doors behind you. Go out the double doors to the parking lot, double doors to my left, your right, down the stairs, and out to the parking lot. Before we begin this meeting, I'd like to address the audience. Mayor Crisati read this statement last night at the town council meeting, and I'm reading it here. Our goal for our public meetings on the Town Council and Board of Education is to have our meetings be orderly, where the public is able to attend, participate, and listen. We expect that as elected and appointed officials, we maintain proper decorum while conducting the public's business and for everyone to feel safe. Our expectation is the same for the public. Everyone who attends the Town Council meetings or Board of Education meetings needs to exhibit respect and responsible behaviors at all times. This will be greatly appreciated by all. Roll call, Kathy.
Mrs. Acree,
Here.
Dr. Calnan,
Here.
Mrs. Cushman,
Here.
Mr. Hamry,
Here.
Mr. LeBlanc, Mrs. Pickett,
Present.
Mr. Ryder, Mr. Ungeyer,
Here.
Madam Chair.
Here. Okay, thank you. Item 6, board guests. Mr. Drezek?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Traditionally, when former Board of Education members and then reformed town council, even deputy mayors, finally retire from service, we like to give them a proper send-off. Mrs. Suzak snuck out of town when we didn't have the opportunity to do that, but I was fortunate to see her at the opening of JFK and lured her back to give her a proper farewell. So at this point, our guest this evening is former board member, former deputy mayor and town council member, Ms. Donna Suzak. You can come on.
Can I just say a few words?
Yeah, I was turning it over to you.
Okay. Does anybody else have anything to say, or I'd be more? Okay. So my first term on the Board of Ed and a few terms after that is when I met you, Donna Suzak. I had the utmost respect for you. You were definitely a mentor. We didn't always agree, but you were always very honest and upfront. And I think your knowledge about facilities and roofs and roads goes unmatched. And now that you're enjoying retirement, there is definitely a gap that we're trying to fill. But we're proud of the service and your dedication to the Enfield schools, because even when you moved up to the town council, you never stopped looking at the Board of Ed and remembering us on the Board of Ed. So I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tina.
Thank you, Donna. Oh, Mr. LeBlanc?
Hi, Donna.
John.
Thank you. And I think you were definitely, looking back on election seasons and over the last 2 terms, and one of my favorite walking partners to walk with. And
Every single day.
Every single day we were out there. And, it was mid-afternoon trips around the neighborhoods that I'll remember our time together. And I thank you for your service to the town. And enjoy your trips. I'm sure, you have a lot planned in the coming days, months, and years. So enjoy everything that comes your way.
Thank you.
We have a gift for you.
Thank you.
Donna, on behalf of the district, we want to thank you not just for being a supporter when you were a board member, but as Tina said, constantly advocating for the kids in this community as a council member, and hopefully you're not going to stop now that you're retired. So This is the highest honor we're allowed to give out, but it's the coveted golden apple.
And don't remember, as a Fermi Band parent, she used to always tell us when she was a Fermi Band parent.
Don't mess with the band.
I'm glad you're here for the budget tonight.
I just want to say, I have to know, I've eluded him for almost a decade. So really, you know, your time that you give to the town is so precious, and people don't understand that. And when I say it's almost been a decade, I mean that time just slips through your hands, and you really need to enjoy what you do and do everything to the best that you can do it. And thank you again, and thanks, Chris, for hunting me down all through the town.
Okay. Next item, item 7, superintendent's report. Mr. Drezek?
All right, who wants to go first, guys? Morgan, don't jump at it once.
Today was the last day of midterms, meaning that they are officially over now. That was a very long week. Tomorrow, January 25th, starts our second semester over at the high school. This means new classes for some and the same old boring ones for others. This is an A day with a mentor block thrown in there. Remember this. Says the schedule will be period 1, 2, and then you're going to go to your mentoring period, 3, and then 4, and then we're going to have our lovely grab-and-go lunches. Tomorrow's also a half day to end off the perfect back-to-back half days we've had. February 1st is a program of studies night at the high school. This is for any incoming freshmen or EHS students that want to attend. You will meet in the auditorium to have a presentation, and from there you will go and view the clubs and activities in the cafeteria. The program of studies starts at 7 p.m. February 7th and 8th, there will be civil discourse meetings circles held. This is a 2-day circle that meets, and it's open to all students and staff that would like to attend. It is held during the school day and is counted as a field trip. Email Mr. Murray with any questions that you have.
Thank you, Morgan. Kayla?
Okay, so we have some exciting sporting events going on this week. For our hockey team, we have a game tomorrow, the 25th, against Suffield at 3:45, and we have a game Friday, January 27th, against Southington, which will also be senior night, and both of these games will be held at the Twin Rinks. And the girls basketball team has 2 away games this week. One today, January 24th, against Newington, that was started at 6:45, and then one on Thursday, January 26th, against Manchester at 6:45. And then boys basketball has 1 game this week, which will be in the EHS gymnasium on Thursday against Manchester at 6:45. And then wrestling has 2 meets this week, one tomorrow, January 25th, against Bloomfield at 6 p.m. in the EHS gymnasium, which is their senior night. And then they have another one Thursday, January 26th, at Windsor High School starting at 6 p.m.
Thank you, Kayla.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll
You're
get
welcome.
to the easy part first. As Morgan already mentioned, tomorrow is an already previously planned early dismissal day for all Enfield Public Schools pre-K through 12 students. Coincidentally, there's a PD day for our staff members. Our staff members were notified a few hours ago that in anticipation of the weather coming tomorrow, that we are going to cancel PD for the afternoon. So right now, students will be early dismissed as regularly scheduled. Our staff members will be permitted to leave. That's because the latest forecast indicates that it looks like early afternoon, mid-afternoon is when the weather may break. Just an annual reminder. Look, we held off as long as I could talking about snow, but it's here. I did get some questions. Like it happens to all condense into 1 week. Typically for tomorrow, I just want to notify all parents that obviously you're already planning for an early release day. That is with lunch. We will do everything we can to stay on that schedule, but as the weather reports come in at some point this evening and at some point probably by 4 a.m. tomorrow, if it appears that the weather is going to move in a little bit quicker and we have to shorten the day even more, we do have the option of calling an early release day without lunch, which gets our kids home a little bit earlier. We obviously try not to To do that, we'd like to feed kids when they come in, but if it's absolutely necessary, then we may make an adjustment. So stay tuned. I did get some questions this week just to clear the air for some people who said, why didn't we have an early release on Monday? Very simply, they told us that the strongest weather was coming in from 11:30 to 2. So an early release would have been at the heart of when the strongest weather was coming in. So this was a weird situation where they actually said, stay in as long as you can, give our DPW crew time to clear out, which they did a great job doing. So it was very minimal parent complaints to me on this one. So I think we did the right call, but it's winter in New England, folks. I guess we need to buckle in a little bit. We had a good run to this point with dodging snow, so I'm hoping after this week we get another clear sailing for the rest of the winter season. The update in the next item on the superintendent's report, I've got to remind everybody in the audience watching at home, the 10 of you with our student reps, this is the one time a year where I'm actually supposed to talk long, so buckle in. This is one of my constitutional responsibilities, and that's delivering the superintendent's recommended budget. So Alex, if we could start, there we go. I'm going to start by just stating something that I've kind of hinted at as we've gotten to this point tonight. And I'll say this is my, I think, 18th budget cycle here in town. 18 or 19, you lose count after a while. This is the weirdest one that I've ever had to do. And hopefully if I do this the way I'm planning, this will all make sense when I'm done. But in all the years that I've been part or had to do budget presentations, this has been the most unique and weird one that I've had to actually go through. So I'm going to get into it, but I'm going to also warn you it's going to look a little different than what you may be used to or some of our audience members. Donna snuck out already, so it's not going to look like anything Donna knew. But there's a reason for that. It's also not as flashy. Town manager went up me. She had some really cool slides last night. I don't. We kind of cut back on the graphics because there's a lot to get to. Our philosophy, this is the one familiar thing you will see through every budget presentation that I've ever given, and that's our philosophy. The only difference was the first bullet point with getting our kids through a pandemic didn't exist my first few years, but I want to remind everybody, this is the philosophy of which we develop our budget process for. Most important thing right now is getting our kids through a pandemic. I realize that we have learned to live in COVID is still here. We don't see the daily percentage rates and the mandates and all the things that we've been dealing with over the last couple of years. And by no means, I am not in the prediction business. If I was, the Cowboys would be playing the Giants this weekend. So that'll tell you how good I am. But one of the things I distinctly remember having a conversation for, and I believe, Mr. LeBlanc, it was you and I on a virtual meeting, was this is going to be with us for a while. And what you're going to see through this process is, although the COVID part of this may seem as if it's over, but the effects that it has had on our kids is not, and it's going to be with us for some time coming. Our other philosophy is to stretch our funds as far as we can. We know we don't have unlimited resources. We'll get into some of the funding streams later that are going to disappear. But the most important thing that I could present is sustainability. I don't want to lose anything we have. I don't believe we can afford, not financially, but for what we actually produce for our kids, we can't afford to lose anything that we currently have. So the philosophy hasn't changed over the last couple of years, and you're going to probably see the same thing next year if I'm sitting here. There is a different perspective this year. So I won't go through every single one, but I'll just highlight as a reminder for those who maybe haven't been watching board meetings since September. But we started off the beginning of this school year with our equity statement. And then we had a very robust social emotional learning presentation from Julie Carroll and her staff. I had mentioned, and I've also put in communications, we had to do some restructuring down at central office. I gave you guys a brief presentation on state data that came out of EdSite. It was really, the foundation of that was the definition of a high needs student. And we'll get into that a bit. It was sort of culminated a few weeks back when Michelle Middleton came and presented our academic data, and obviously everything progresses and culminates this evening with the budget presentation. I want to take a step back, though, and remind everybody where we started this year, and that's our equity statement. Now, I didn't write this. I was part of it. We started this process like we did with our district motto, where we started with administrators over the summer because they were here. But whenever all staff came back, we sent it out and asked for input. Ultimately, on September 13th of this year, we as a district, not you as a board, got behind this that we wanted to present publicly, and I'll read it one last time. is that we believe every child is unique, and the diversity of our students is what makes Enfield Public Schools exceptional. To thrive and excel, all are welcome, accepted, respected, and supported, period. That evening, although you weren't required, the board actually changed the rules and adopted that as your own on September 13th. And I don't know if it was formally adopted, but I was told at the next town council meeting that this equity statement was actually endorsed by the town council as well. That's significant because the two largest governing bodies in town, in addition to the largest department in town, are all behind the same thing. It was important for us to start with this because I understand that a lot of people have a different definition of what equity is or what it means to them. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful, but we needed to be very clear on what equity meant to us. Because if we spent most of our time trying to argue that, well, this is what we meant by, or this is what our intentions were, we would never accomplish anything. So it was important for us to come out of the gate and define, this is what we're working of. You can have your own, and I welcome other people's opinions, but this is ours. And everything that we do is going to be focused on this. But what does it mean? I mean, the reality is these are just words, but our actions have to mirror what our belief system is, and this is a belief statement. So the most important first step is the creation of the Director of Educational Equity. You guys have all met Ms. Cox-Blackwell. She's fantastic. You all know that. I don't need to go through that whole process, but that was just one of the first steps. One of the other things that we had to do over this summer was we needed to restructure all the professional development that we give for our entire staff, focusing and including equity. It was just something we hadn't necessarily done consistently throughout the district. So you can ask any staff member or any teacher. Don't ask them tomorrow because PD got canceled, but you can ask any staff member that you know about if we're putting our money where our mouth is and making sure that we're embedding equity in what we're doing. We also had to make a commitment to an equity review. As we shared with the board, Ms. Cox-Blackwell shared, is that we've contracted with CREC to complete that review. That also includes you guys. As you know, next Wednesday, you have your equity review meeting with the team from CREC. So this was something, by signing on to that statement, you guys are embedded in that process as well. But although this seems like a lot, and it has been a lot in a short period of time, we still have a lot more work to do, and you'll see that embedded when we start talking about dollars and cents. The next presentation was on social and emotional learning. And just like with equity, there's a lot of different definitions when it comes to acronyms in education. People see SEL and they think it's one thing. They think it might be something they heard on television or they read on social media. It was very important for us to define what social and emotional learning was. Fortunately, we didn't have to recreate a definition. The State Department of Education actually produced the definition for us. So on the screen is not only the state definition, but also the American Association of School Counselors, the American School Counselor Association definition. I'm not going to read it, it's there for the taking, but on September 27th of this year, you got a pretty robust presentation about all of the different social and emotional learning components that we have in the district. What some of you realized that evening was SEL opportunities are not just in special education. It's not just school counselors. As you can see on the screen, people who provide SEL opportunities are general ed teachers, special ed teachers, counselors, psychologists, social workers, speech and language therapists. I won't read the whole thing. It's up there. You could see it. But you get the point. That was an important second step. We talked about having to restructure central office a bit. And the reality is that our kids' needs have changed, and we needed to restructure in order to change with them. And by creating these new positions with existing people, mind you, these weren't 4 new positions, we had to make a direct link to make sure that we were helping the needs of our kids. So obviously the educational equity director position we talked about with Altressa is sort of self-explanatory. But when we talk about restructuring, putting people in roles to better support the needs of our kids, one of the areas was talent development. What does that mean? Well, that means that our teachers are struggling. And right now, the way that the process is teachers have an evaluation process, but that's just like you guys in your jobs. You have your boss telling you what you did or did not do well. We lacked that coaching component. So putting somebody in the district that's a friendly face and, quite frankly, has a track record of being an amazing teacher before they got into administration, in order to coach teachers and administrators to make sure that we're tapping our resources so that to ensure that we're producing the best opportunities we can for our kids through our staff. I'm going to skip down the Director of Strategic Development and Partnerships. It's a long way of saying, you guys know John Dake. Mr. Unghire, at the last meeting, you gave an update about a field trip where our kids were lucky enough to take up the Boston Scientific. Those partnerships, those opportunities, those aren't just things that we do during the school day. Now, you orchestrated that, but there's a million other opportunities that we have. And there's even more opportunities out there that we don't tap for our kids, but we needed to have somebody who was directly focused on that. We have the right people. We just had to clear their plate a little bit in order for them to expand on that. That also includes partnerships that we have with private industry, with additional educational facilities, our Nantucket partnerships, our partnership with Springfield Technical Community College. All of that stuff falls under the guidance of John's office. The last one, the Director of Innovation, you're going to know more about that at your next meeting, because I know I told you that Dr. Wiley's going to come and explain one of the things that she's working on in our elementary schools. But some of you had the opportunity to attend a digital literacy night. If you have any questions on exactly where we're going, you'll have a pretty good idea after you get wowed by what Dr. Wiley does. What we needed the public to see and parents to see is we have a lot of resources in town. But what we need to do is close that gap to let families know that these resources are there for them and for their kids when we don't have their kids for 6.5 hours a day. That process has started, and it's only going to expand from there. Talking about the EdSite presentation that I gave. So it was a presentation. It was really just more playing with the website and showing you the bubbles and all that stuff. And I had this in front of me when I did it, so I'm going to move my mic and try to read off of this one. Just for those who may not be familiar of what this was. But the state defines a per pupil expenditure per percentage of students who qualify in one of 3 areas, whether it's special education, free and reduced lunch, English, or English language learners. Now, the state will calculate this percentage of high-need student per school. So what the state does is they take your population in the particular school or in the district, and they take those 3 components. This isn't our definition. This is the state of Connecticut's definition. And within those 3 categories, they will determine how many students of high needs each school or district has. Just to put it in perspective, Enfield High has 46.3% students population of high needs. JFK is 55.8. Now, remind you, take a step back. This is old data. Remember I told you this was 2020. These numbers are only going up. It runs the same data schedule that we do for everything else. Prudence Crandall is at 60.6, Whitney's at 58.8, Parkman at 56.3, Memorial at 54.8, Enfield Street at 49.6, Henry Barnard at 58.9. What that means is it averages, as you can see, about 50% at every building, some a little higher, some a tick lower. 50% of our kids are defined by the state of Connecticut as being high needs. That is every other kid in a classroom, every other desk. That's if you look around the room, when we start with Morgan and then we go to Mr. Hamry, every other person is defined by the state of Connecticut as being of high needs. I've been preaching that our district has changed. Our kids have changed, the needs have changed. This is validation that it's not just me saying it. The state is telling us your kids have changed and you need to adjust to make sure you're reaching the needs of your kids. And the last presentation was on academics. Going back to the previous slide, these are who our kids are and these are what their needs are, and we need to make adjustments. We also have to be honest that academic regression is real from COVID. We're not just making that up. I know some people will say, well, that's just an excuse. That's fine. I can respect that, but it's also real. One of the things that was most alarming when we're looking at this year's assessment data, and again, assessment data is a bit skewed because it's taken early in the school year with the expectation of where kids should be at the end of the year, but the reality is when we looked at our assessment data for kids in transitional grades, it was alarming. And it's more alarming because we know that those kids are leaving soon. Granted, they're staying in town, they're going to another school, but think about that. Those of you who have children, those transition years, when your kids are going to a new school, new principal, new teacher, in some cases, new friends. Some cases going from being the oldest kid in school to back being the youngest kid in school again. Remember when you guys were freshmen? That's real. Transitional regression is a real thing, and we're experiencing that. And one of the things that we're putting direct efforts in now, as I shared last week, was putting targeted interventions in for those kids. We posted the positions where I know some people have reached out and they're willing to help, and I appreciate that. But one of the things that we're making a concentrated effort in right now is for those transitional grades, our kids in 2nd and 5th grade. to do everything we can to get those kids up to speed before they leave and go to the next place. Because once they're gone, we already have those natural regressions through transition that are going to affect those kids. So Michelle spent a lot of time. I know the curriculum subcommittee talks a lot about this, but I just wanted to highlight some of the things that you'll see when we're talking about making sure we maintain what we have, that this is at the heart of it. So where do we go from here? So the old way that we did things does not meet the needs of our kids today. It just doesn't. Believe me, it's a lot easier for me to roll out the same presentation and change the numbers. To be quite honest, I would have preferred it. But that's not fair. That's not where we are. That's not where our kids are. And we need to look at this budget process differently than we have in the past. And this is a reminder. This is usually a time of year, and I'm glad that the invocation was centered around Mr. T-Katz. I've known Mr. T-Katz a long time, and I used to have a lot of knockdown arguments with him, but at the end of the day, it was always respectful. Because this is the time of year where everybody becomes an accountant. So our funds are not a spreadsheet. Our funds are a reflection of what we believe in and the supports that we provide for our kids. And this is an opportunity for us to sort of change the lens into how we look at how we spend our money. I also understand that this can get pretty cumbersome if I really wanted it to. So I needed to consolidate this down to a way that I can translate it at a microphone. Instead of doing 25 different categories, I came up with 4. I shouldn't say we came up with 4. In the first one, yellow means nothing to you now, but when you actually get the budget document, it'll make sense to you, because we color-coded stuff because I was getting confused. But the first category that we're now looking at the budget through is supports. And it seems like it's pretty blanket, but supports are anything that goes directly to supporting kids, but not strictly academic. So we talked at length during our SEL presentation. All of those components, those aren't necessarily reading, writing, and math, but those are components that are necessary to support our kids. Counselors, social workers, behavioral techs. I talked about English language learning. That's something that's not strictly academic, but it's things that we have to supply supports for kids for. So looking through that lens of where the funds are going for that particular area, it's not strictly academic, but it's the things that we still have to do. Health and safety is a big one. Obviously coming out of a pandemic and looking across the desk, masks aren't free anymore. That was in previous years. We don't buy them anymore. But in addition, it's not just physical health and physical safety, but it's emotional health and emotional safety as well. School security is a big one. And I know that's on every parent's mind. And trust me, I'm a parent. I'm a school superintendent. It's on my mind too. I can't get into a million specifics, but I can tell you that we're putting a large number of resources into school facility measures. We talked during the SEL presentation about the role of behavioral techs and paraprofessionals. Administration and support staff. People think your school building principal, you're just an instructional leader. Newsflash, they're not. They're the first line of defense in a crisis. In a perfect world, you can ask any school principal what they do every day, and they would tell you that I'm in classrooms and I'm looking at academic data, but in reality, they're dealing with you guys. They're dealing with parents. They're dealing with somebody, if it's an elementary school and somebody lost their backpack, then that's the first place they're going. If somebody's angry, that's the first place that they're going. So that's actually broken down, and we figured out a way to break down percentages of what some administration staff actually does in support as well as academic. So it'll look a little bit different. I can't talk about academic and support staff and supporting kids without talking about our real frontline workers. That's our school secretaries. Every single one of you who've been in a school, that's the first person that greets you. When something goes wrong or somebody forgets something, that's the person who takes care of it for you. When your kid forgets their lunch or their sneakers or their $1 for pajama day, that's the person you're going to meet. We need to separate exactly how we're paying for certain things, but all of it is equally important. Nutrition. We can't support our kids if they're hungry. So that falls into the support category as well. And there's one that we don't talk about as often as we should, but I wanted to make sure that I highlight it, and that's alternative education. Alternative education traditionally has been thought of as, and I don't want to put this particular person on the spot, but I'm going to. It used to be called Malley Academy. So traditionally, alternative ed was for students who were going through the expulsion process. But what we recognized over the time was we had a lot of kids that were the traditional 6.5-hour school day didn't work. And some of the options were these kids would pursue, if we were lucky, going through a GED program, or in some cases dropping out, Or could we actually intervene and give these kids designated programs to make sure that they graduated from Enfield High School? And we've done that. We've done that because we have the space and the resources and, quite frankly, the right people, of which Mr. Malley is one, and through our alternative ed program. But that's a support for kids. That's not written anywhere of just being an academic program. That's a program that if we didn't have in place, those kids would not graduate, or those kids would end up going to get their GED. Now, that's not necessarily, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but if we can get those kids to graduate with their high school diploma, that's the end game, folks. That's the goal. So I've asked Ms. Crissati to come present here, and there's been times where she's said no because some of her kids will take her away, but I will get her at some point. That's just one we haven't been able to do yet, and I thought it was important to highlight this evening. The next category is pretty self-explanatory. That's academics. That's going to be your orange section when you get your actual documents, but that's everything. Those are our teachers, our instructional supports, our professional development. I mentioned PD earlier. Well, guess what? We have to pay for that. Technology is an interesting one. When I first started this, technology wouldn't have been considered academic. Technology would have been considered a nice to have. And I remember an old friend telling me that technology should be a utility while he was going nuts. It was Mr. Neville. He was right. And now in today's world, technology is not an option. Technology is a way that our kids have no choice but to learn. We don't have an option about providing our kids with technology. Now, there's other technology we'll get to in a moment. Our curriculum, I know that the state guides us on what we do for curriculum, but we still have to write it, we still have to review it, we still have to pay for it in some cases. That's where the funding comes from, as well as academic supplies and materials. If you see kids coming home with books, guess where they came from? They came from that bucket. We just came out of the holiday season. A lot of our little guys came home with some sort of holiday card, or if it was probably red or green construction paper, that's how we paid for it, out of that bucket. The next one is the one that's going to take, I think, first of all, I don't know if it's the right color. I'm calling it purple. When you see it, it may look like a magenta. I don't know what that is. But I'm calling it purple. But this is the category that I think it's important for the public to understand that we're referring to as opportunity and access. These are the things that we're not required to do, but we do them because it's good for kids. Okay, these are our extracurricular opportunities that we have for kids. These are our music programs. These are our arts and theater. These are sports. These are elective courses. I don't know if everybody remembers this, but I know that our two friends, student reps here, know this. How many study halls you guys got? Those of you who can't see them, it's 0. Our kids at Enfield High School do not have study halls. That was by design. But in order to do that, we had to fill their schedules with something, and it was an opportunity when this community banded together and built a new high school. The commitment we made was kids should be taking as many classes, especially in elective areas that interest them, that make them college and career ready, and they shouldn't be taking study halls. And you, as a board, the town council, have honored that commitment, and they don't have a study hall. That's not required. We're not required to do that, but we do it because it's the best for our kids. Technology, we mentioned that. That's an academic tool now. We have no choice but to use that. But we have a lot of technology in this district that's not. You know, when we took the tour of JFK, through JFK, I overheard a lot of you going from room to room, and you happened to notice, I think it was you, Ms. Akri, that said, where did all these signs on the doors come from? So every classroom had the teacher's name that was printed in from a 3D printer. That's technology. All those signs were made at JFK. We had to pull Mr. Hamry out of some of the labs because he was touching too much stuff. All that technology in there, that's not required. We don't have to have it, but we do because it's the best opportunity for our kids. Clubs, we have over 100 clubs at Enfield High School. I don't have the number off the top of my head, but we have a lot of clubs at JFK. And these are not just traditional clubs that one would think is an extracurricular activity like sports or theater or music. We have clubs, and I would defer to the experts about some of the clubs because even I get confused at times on how many we have. But there are clubs and opportunities that they meet during Eagle Block because they don't have to have study halls anymore. That's not required. So if a kid is into photography, maybe we didn't have a photography course 10 years ago. Not only have a course, now we have a club. You're not required to, but it's good for them. School partnerships and career opportunities. I mentioned that earlier, that restructure with John Daig, but those partnerships that we have with Asnuntuck, with Stick, we have partnerships with private industries. We have companies come in and do job fairs at Enfield High School. There's a lot of things we do, but we have to pay for that at times in staff time and making sure we have people who are dedicated resources to do that. A lot of you participated in Career Day at Enfield High School. Anybody who went, did anybody have a bad time? That's because we have amazing people running the Career Center. Again, not required, but it's the right thing to do for our kids, and it's supported through this budget process for you guys. Later on this evening, when it's your time to talk, every single one of you, not you two on the ends, but the rest of you, are going to give an update on your schools, which is great. And you're going to talk about some sort of activity that your elementary school or the school that you represent is going to partake in. That family engagement piece, that's not done by accident. We supply some of our schools the infrastructure to engage with families to participate. So the events that you're going to talk about, because it got changed because of the weather, but there's a literacy night. That's all supported under opportunities and access. And the way that it's in the budget now will show you that. This stuff's not free, but it's right. It's the right thing to do. Mr. Ryder's not here. He mentions it every time he comes. I know he's a mentor for some of our kids, and we hear from. I just remember Mr. Salazar being inactive with our mentorship program and talking about how wonderful it was. That's not required either, but that's just these are just examples of things that fall into those opportunities for kids and access for kids. Things that we're not required to do, but we do them because it's right. But people need to understand it also comes at a cost. The last color, I was out of names, so I called it other by law. And in your document, you'll see it's the color blue. These are basically the things that we're required to pay for, even if we don't want to. Don't read into this, especially on bad weather. I'm not saying anything about Smith Bus. They are the best people in the world. I put transportation up there for a reason. I am not advocating to not drive kids to school. But the reality was, it doesn't matter if I did advocate for it, because the law says you have to. So even if you decided we don't want to drive kids anymore, it doesn't matter. You're paying for it. You're also paying for kids who don't necessarily go to our schools, but if they live in town and they go to a private school in town, you're giving them a ride too. You should. I'm not arguing with that. But people at home need to realize that's mandated. We live in a very litigious society. I'm sure no one here is shocked. But every time something like that happens, you have to pay the legal bill. I mentioned FOI. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more at length in a moment, but people see freedom of information and they automatically assume that it's free. It's not. There is a cost to that, and I'll get into that in a second. Magnet school tuitions. If a student in Enfield or if a resident of Enfield applies and is accepted to a magnet school, and I'm not talking bad about magnet schools, that's a choice for a family to make. If that child gets accepted and they're permitted to go, they're going. And you're paying the bill. And you're not going to cut a classroom teacher in a school to pay for that because it's 1, 2, 3 kids. Now, our numbers have been going down. But the reality is, if kids decide they want to go to magnets, we're paying for it, whether we like it or not. I also have to, because you're going to hear about this in a second, our special education costs. For those magnet school students that want to go, if they have an IEP and they get special education services, we're paying for that as well. The magnet school is not paying that bill. So it's important to know that there are a lot of things, and these are just some examples of things that we have to pay for, whether we want to or not. What people at home need to understand, we don't have a choice on some of this stuff. All right. No big reveals this year. I don't have somebody to come, pull a rabbit out of a hat. Our current budget is $73.2 million. That's how much we currently spend right now. Here's the old accountant hat. Everybody used to know, what's the fixed cost? So the fixed costs are, we keep everything we currently have. It's 3.96% increase over this current year's budget. I'm going to pause for a second. Andy's my market guy. What's inflation? I don't know.
I think latest 6.5%. I think
He follows this stuff all the time better than I do. That's why. So figure 6.5%. Our fixed cost, our inflation, is less than 4. Now, there's a reason it's less than 4, and we'll get into that in a sec, but you have to think of that in terms of the cost of doing things is more expensive now. All of you go to a gas station. You're paying more for gas than you did 2 years ago. So are we. If you have to buy something from a store, you're probably paying more for it because of supply chains and all this other stuff that we hear about. So are we. Now, we may get discounts because we buy things in bulk, but the discount doesn't cover the increase in price than it was the last time we bought it. Everything has gone up. We are not immune to inflation because we're a public school system. I wish it were different. It's not. But to keep everything we have, I need 3.96% over what we got last year. So that's what I'm asking for. Sit tight, because I know one of you ain't going to like it. But that makes our budget request $76.1 million, or a 3.96% increase. There's nothing new, but more importantly, nothing's coming out. And what really made this weird is what we're going to get into. But typically, that number includes something that's permitted by state law, and we have been very fortunate, at least in my tenure here, that the town council has approved, is including a 2% carryover. So what that means is if we save 2% of our current fiscal year's budget, the town council, through their generosity and appreciativeness, is part of the, it's not a proclamation, then the word is escaping me, the appropriation to the board, they allow us whatever the increase is that they're appropriating for us, let's say it's 2% or 4%, whatever the number happens to be. In that motion, they will also include that the board can carry over up to 2% of their current year's money if they have that available. So the town is saying, you don't need to give us any extra money you have back at the end of the year. Roll it into next year and give yourself a little bit of a cushion. We need to look at that 2% carryover as our reserve or break glass in case of emergencies. The glass was broken in September. That 2% that I typically, so last year I may have asked for a 3% increase, but it was really a 5% increase because, and don't hold me to the numbers, I can't remember off the top of my head, because I don't have it in front of me. I'm looking at the same thing you guys are. That always included that 2% carryover. And what that does is that helps soften the blow for what the board has to request. I don't have the 2% this year. Usually by now, and the reason we're doing this today and not 2 weeks ago is because I needed 2 more weeks to see if we can find the 2% to adjust that number. I don't have it. There's a lot of reasons why we don't have it. And it's important for you guys and ultimately the town council and ultimately the residents of this community to know. There has been a drastic increase in our special education costs. This year, we have a 22% increase in special education referrals. Put that in perspective, that's over 150 additional students that are referred to the special ed process. Doesn't mean they have IEPs yet, but it means they've been referred. Any student that's referred through the IEP process requires evaluation that we are, again, mandated to do. And I'm not saying I don't agree with it, I do agree with it. But in order to do that evaluation, it has to be done by a psychologist, a school psychologist in most cases. We have school psychologists on staff, but we don't have enough to oversee a 22% increase in referrals. So what that means is if we don't have enough in-house staff to conduct these evaluations, we have to find somebody to do them. And when we go out into the marketplace to find somebody to do them, you're going to pay 10 times as much for that evaluation if we had one on our own staff member doing it themselves. That's what happened. And it's no one's fault. If I wanted to hire 10 more school psychologists and I had the money to do it and money wasn't an object, still can't do it. Good luck finding them. We're going to talk about staffing in a moment, but it's not feasible. And we're not alone in this, but the reality is the pace of referrals was something we couldn't predict. So that is a big contributing factor. Outplacements. Special education students whose programming in district doesn't meet their needs has drastically increased. The amount of students that are showing an alarming rate of significant mental health issues that require a clinical placement has increased drastically. Now, some people who follow this process may say, well, didn't you build Eagle Academy? Yes. These are not the kids we're talking about. These are kids who require clinical placements in more of a clinical, in some cases, hospital setting. We don't have that programming in district. But what happens is if we can't meet that programming need of those kids, then we have to support the outplacement and we have to pay the tuition for it. And we're talking about tuitions that can range from $50,000 to $150,000 per student per year. I hate doing this because people put a dollar amount on what a kid's need is, and it comes across as saying, I don't have any money because I got to pay. That's not it, but it's just reality. That's where the funding is going to. Going back to Eagle Academy, when we first built Eagle Academy, I stood in front of the board and the town council and said, I need 6 kids to break even. You want this program to be self-sustaining? We need 6 kids. I can cap it at 26. Anything above 26, between 6 and 26, we can function, but I can't take any more than 26. Even if some of those 22% kids that I mentioned earlier would qualify for Eagle Academy, I don't have any room for them because currently we have 27 kids at Eagle Academy. We're 1 kid above what we said the limit was, but we didn't want to turn 1 kid down. So I have no more room. It's a good thing it's a good problem to have because it means we did it right and the process is working. We have other towns. I got a call today from a surrounding town that said, any chance I can get one of my kids in the Eagle Academy? And I had to tell them no. There's a wait list for surrounding towns to get their kids into our program. The reality is we just ran out of space. Staff retention, we're going to hear about that in a second too. But you have to look at this realistically. People are jumping ship. And then I used to take this personal, but the reality is I can't take this personal anymore. None of us can. I don't blame people. If a staff member we hired last June and we paid them $50,000 a year, and they come October, get a job offer from a town that's throwing money at them, and they make $70,000 a year, how do I look somebody in the eye and say, no, you shouldn't take a $20,000 pay raise? And before people ask the question, well, can't you match it? The answer is no. If that person has 3 years experience, I can only give them step 3, which got them the $50,000. If another district has a way to pay them more, they're going to be able to make more money somewhere else. But I can't say, all right, well, I'll pay you at 70 to keep you. And even though you have 3 years experience, I'm going to put you on step 9. Because we have like close to 200 staff members who have been here beyond 15 years, and they're only at step 9 because we've frozen steps so many years. So when we talked about the teacher's contract, one of the things I was adamant about was I'm not doing step freezes because this is the cost of it. And it's really, so why this is eating into that breaking glass and finding that 2%? Because if a staff member leaves in October, I got 2 options. Pay whatever I can to find somebody to take that job, or leave it open. And if I leave it open, that means you guys don't have a teacher. And depending upon the level, some of it's an actual classroom teacher that the kid is with all day. We don't have that luxury. So we have to do whatever we can to find somebody and put them in there. But the reality is, if someone's going to jump ship in October and come here, not to say they wouldn't want to be here and they're not excited about working in Enfield, but the reality is they probably have more than 15 years experience, which means that $50,000 teacher is now going to be an $80,000, $90,000 teacher, and I don't have any of this budgeted. So that's also part of the reason was we had to go into our reserves to cover things that we didn't anticipate happening. That wasn't in the budget. Nutrition. At some point tonight, one of you or somebody in the audience is going to ask, are we going to still feed our kids for free? I hope so. Traditionally, the way our nutrition services works, and some of you on the finance committee understand this, is that Diane Edwards and her staff do a remarkable job, not just with feeding our kids and taking care of our kids, but also running a good fiscal shop and making sure that money gets stretched as far as it can. One of the benefits through the federal reimbursement program and the rules under which the nutrition service program operates is they're allowed to carry some money, operating expenses over month to month for incidental things. So we make our own food. When you make your own food, you're allowed to keep money in reserve in your nutrition program in the event something goes wrong. If an oven breaks, if a warmer goes down, if a freezer blows. Fortunately for us, our two production kitchens are Enfield High and JFK. So Diane, as frugal as she is, realized I don't need to save the normal money that I have to, so over the summer I can buy a new oven or a transmission for the van or whatever the case is. I don't necessarily need that. So there's usually two options. You'll see in the budget every year, Nutrition Services reimburses the board about $390,000. To be totally honest, the last 3 years, she couldn't do it. She didn't have it because she wasn't selling any lunch. This was a year where she was able to maybe make that reimbursement back. That would ordinarily be a place I would go to help fund that 2% carryover. This year was different. The options were take money out of nutrition to carry it over into next year's budget, or feed kids. Now, we talk every week about trying to feed kids as long as we can, trying to feed kids as long as we can. We have to pay for it. You know, the state did a nice job with the SMART funding at the beginning, realizing they had additional COVID money left over that they sent out to local districts to try, just for people who are watching at home may not know this, kids haven't had to pay for lunch throughout COVID for the last 2 years. So knowing that was about to expire, the state reutilized some of their COVID relief money and sent them to districts and said, continue to feed kids as long as you can. But eventually that money's gonna run out. We were in a different position to say, rather than cut it off and tell everyone it's time you have to pay for lunches, to take some of those reserve funds that we ordinarily would have to buy new equipment for and do one of two things. I would usually go to Diane at this time of the year and say, I need to take some of that contribution to help fund the budget for next year. The other option was feed kids for free. Don't take this the wrong way, but if it means I gotta ask for more money because I'm feeding kids, I'm gonna feed kids. But that's where the money's going, folks. And the last one is one that I never thought I'd have to talk about, but I think in fairness to you and the people at home who may not know this, I referenced it earlier, and I have to be very clear when I state this. I don't want anybody to misread something or say God knows what. Dredzik said this. I have no problem with the Freedom of Information Act. I have no problem with, this has nothing to do with the press or the media, or I've asked some of the reporters who may call you guys, I've always said the same thing to reporters. Even when it's inconvenient, I know you got a job to do, and your job is to tell a story. That's not what I'm talking about here. Traditionally, our FOI requests that come into the district, they're pretty simple. It's usually around some sort of a contract, possibly a disciplinary letter or something along those lines. To give you an example, bus consultants, notorious for sending an FOI request for our bus contract so that they can try to outbid Smith Bus when our bid comes up. Copy people, relentless. They're like solar people when you get on your cell phones. The copy people will send us FOI requests relentlessly. Those are easy fixes because they're public documents. We're a public agency. We take them. Doesn't take much review. It's all public. We charge them 50 cents a page. We give it to them. There are other requests that are typical, not just contracts, but employment contracts. Sometimes, a lot of times, word may get out to the media that a staff member got in trouble. So we'll get an FOI request for a disciplinary record. Those are easy to turn over because when that disciplinary record is written, it's written with the knowledge that this will become a public document. So we make sure that we don't put any personal violation information into the letter. So it's a matter of just taking them and sending them or allowing the people to look at them. Parents' FOI stuff about their kids. I have no problem with any of it. I really had no problem with all of it until this year. In the last year, the amount of FOI requests and the sheer volume of those requests are unlike anything I have ever seen in my life. And I've talked to a lot of colleagues who are amazed at the junk that we've had to produce. And this is where I think the public needs to understand. Freedom of information doesn't mean free for you guys. The person getting the information, it's free, but it's not for you. Let me tell you what I mean. The requests that we've gotten in the last 12 months, again, I don't want the media to think I don't want to talk to them. I don't, but they know that. That's not what I'm talking about. When we get a request that is so expansive that asks for every communication for the last 6 months between all 9 of you, me, the 11 town council members, with a word in it. Those become so expansive, I can't just pull like a copier contract off the shelf and hand them to them, because there are concerns of information that I legally can't turn over. There is, first and foremost, confidential, federally protected student privacy information in those. There is protected personnel information in those. There is HIPAA information in those. There are attorney-client privilege information that we're not legally allowed to turn over. So there's 2 options when we get an overwhelming request like that. And I'm not picking on one person here. This has been going on from a year from multiple people. When we get a request like that, I got 2 options. Pull all the information, send it out, and hope for the best and let the chips fall where they may. But I put at risk you guys, because if I turn over something that I'm not supposed to, you own it. If I violate a kid's federally protected privacy rights, and that parent sees this, and they file suit against us, they're gonna win. We talked earlier about we live in a litigious society. This is what I'm talking about. Or my other option is I've got to go through all of it from the eyes of a lawyer to make sure what I'm giving up, I'm supposed to give up. I'm not a lawyer. So every one of these giant requests has to go through our legal counsel. That going through our legal counsel costs money. To date, does not include January because I haven't got the bill yet, but we had a doozy in January. To date, we have spent $75,000 on these FOI requests. Not parents looking for information on kids, not the copy guy who asks me every year, not the bus people. FOI requests about every communication all 9 of you have ever had. And I'm not just talking about emails. I'm talking about phone calls, recordings of phone calls. I don't know about you guys, but I ain't Richard Nixon. Nobody's recording my phone calls that I know of. If you're recording it, you got it already. Even take that a step beyond. Having to produce logs of our phone calls to turn over. My question is, for what? Why? So some people can take shots at each other on Facebook? So that people can make silly videos and become stars online? I'm sure as these words are coming to my mouth right now, I'm on somebody's video. I'm okay with that, because you know what? The video right now is free. But every time we get one of these expansive ones, those of you who, we've heard people come right to the dais and make reference to the information they got through an FOI request. Those of you who have seen it, if you've seen the redaction in it, newsflash, I didn't redact it. I don't have a black electronic Sharpie. Your lawyer did that. We are going to be over $100,000 this year for the size. We had an FOI request that was so large that we couldn't even transport the documents to the respondent. We had to actually pay our attorney to set one up on their server and give the person requesting the information a 7-day window to go in and electronically download it. Why? Did it better anybody's life by doing it? I don't know. I'm not in social media world, so maybe it was worth it. But you're asking me how I'm going to spend your money, and I'm telling you this is where some of it's going. And I understand the argument that people are going to say FOI is about transparency. You're right. I 100% believe you. I agree with you. But you know what else is transparency? What I'm telling you guys right now. Because the people at home, our taxpayers, our parents, our kids need to know when they need something and we can't do it, it's because we have obligations that we have to pay that we don't necessarily agree with. Ms. Pickett, I'm going to pick on you because I know this question is coming. Excuse me. And I know it's coming because when I said this last week, I can tell by your question you didn't like it. But I told you guys at last meeting we're not having summer school this year. Now, staffing summer school is still going to be a challenge. But what we spent, and I just told you, that's 3 weeks of summer school. It's 3 weeks of summer school because we had to pay for this. That's my soapbox on this. Now I want to get back to what's important. The request that I'm asking for is 3.96%, maintains what we have. COVID relief funds, we talked about it. I spent my entire budget presentation last year talking about ESSER and ARPA and all that other stuff. If you want to do that again, I'll do it, but I'm really not in the mood to do it. One thing I got to remind you of, when we got all that funding, everybody was coming at us saying, what are you going to use it for? What are you going to spend it for? What are you going to spend it for? And I got killed because I kept telling everybody, wait, let's make sure we manage this because eventually there's going to be a cliff and we need to run it out. I asked him a question earlier. What's the inflation number? What'd you say?
6.5.
6.5. It's not magic that our number is 4. Our number should be 6.5. But because we managed our COVID relief money, that is embedded in the 4%. If we didn't save the money and spend it appropriately, we wouldn't have it next year. That number would be beyond 6%. So part of the reason last year I told you about how we weren't spending it all at once, a lot of the things that we're currently paying for, a vast majority of things that we're paying for in the SEL presentation, we're doing so with managing. Lorena has done a remarkable job managing legally because I get the reminders on a daily basis when there's an update to the grant from the state of Connecticut that says your grant request has been approved. We're managing the COVID relief money to stretch it as long as we can. Had we not had done that and spent it all when we got it, your request right now or mine would be closer to 7% than it is to 4%. Most importantly, and this is the thing everyone needs to take away from this does not have any staff or program reductions in it. That is my priority right now. My priority right now is because this is not. Every year we have unknowns. We spend a lot of time talking about them. This year's nuts. And let me tell you why. I got 2 retirements right now. Now, teachers and administrators aren't required to tell us they're retiring until February, and that's a very personal decision, so I never try to push people. But the reality is, I'm not going to know how many retirements I got until you guys have to adopt the budget. So there's a lot of unknowns. We'll get more than 2. Every year we go through insurance stuff. Insurance is at 3% right now. That's a number not to exceed. With any luck, our claims usually decrease in the second half of the year. Again, I'm sounding like an accountant again. That number will go down, but it's not down right now. So the commitment we've always made to the council is this is what we think we need, but we know that number is going to come down, but we'll work on it. Change in personnel. I know people are going to leave. I hope they don't. If you're watching this at home, I'm sorry. Don't go, but people are going to go. And as new people come in, there are salary differences on who leaves and who comes in. I don't know that right now. I'm not comfortable telling you this is what I think it's going to be. The 2% carryover is the first year I haven't recommended that 2% being in there. But what I did was I froze this year's budget. I could deliver some real bad news to our administrative staff a few weeks ago and says no more money until we can try to balance the books a little bit to see if we can somehow attain part of that 2% in order to carry into going forward for next year. Alliance funding. You guys know we got designated as an alliance district. We didn't get any money. However, I find it hard to believe we won't. The problem is you're not going to know, and the council's not going to know because that's all contingent upon whether or not it gets approved in the state budget. This process is backwards. Walter still here? Former Chairman Krzel, sorry. I don't know how many years I heard you and Tom say that. This is backwards. It's backwards. We have to come up with a budget to the people who have to decide how much to give us. They have to come up with a budget to decide how much they're going to charge everybody. They have no idea where they're getting their money from because it comes from the state. It's nobody's fault. It's the process. It's the way it works. I just don't know right now. The last one is important. Educational cost sharing, that's the granddaddy of them all. That's the big grant that funds from the state of Connecticut that goes to the town of Enfield to fund education. There is currently a proposed bill. I don't believe it got out of committee yet, but the process is moving. There was also, and Madam Chair, you and I sat through a community a workshop, with the school state finance project that I believe Representative Arnone sponsored. And they had asked you and I believe Mr. Crisati to participate in that, talking about school funding. There is a proposal, and I need to bring you back to where we talked about student data earlier, that would, I'm breaking stuff. I got to pay for microphones. Sorry. There is currently a proposal in the Education Committee and I believe Appropriations that hasn't gotten out yet, but it's out there, that would fundamentally change the formula for the ECS grant. If that were to go through, there are two components of that bill that are very important to us. I am on the Alliance Network committee. I've been asked to testify down in Hartford when they go to public hearing for this bill. I don't know if my testimony is going to be written or verbal right now, but either way, I will do whatever I'm asked in order to support this. The way the legislation is written currently, the change for the town of Enfield for ECS, the formula would no longer just be on population as a whole. It would be following not just the child, but the needs of the child. Going back to where I was about half hour ago, that high needs percentage of kids that we had, the money is going, so the higher your percentage, the higher your formula is. The way that the bill is written as it is right now would be an increase of almost $1.5 million in the very first year in ECS money coming to the town of Enfield. Now, that's how it's written now. There's another component to this bill, and that would no longer require local boards of education to pay for magnet school tuitions. So those two components, if they survive the legislative process, there's $2.5 million coming into this town without you guys doing a thing. That covers almost everything we're asking for here. The problem is, I don't know if this is real. It has to go through the legislative process. We're not going to know. Now, what we can do now is to advocate that this is something we would support. I'm certainly preparing to do that, and I will share with the board more information on its Bill 5003, House Bill 5003. It's on the Ed Committee right now. I will certainly share that information with you. You have an opportunity to see if you guys support that as well. But based on the current formula of this proposed legislation, that would be a drastic impact on the funding that we receive from the state of Connecticut. This is why I don't want to ask for, as someone said, a greedy budget, because I could ask for something that we may be in a weird position where we get more money in June than we thought we needed or wanted or asked for in January. I just don't know. Now, we could get to June and have no money. That's possible. It's always a possibility. I'm not going to give you something until I know I have it in my pocket. That's what makes this year so crazy. There are challenges that we have that this budget does not address. Staffing. We are at a crisis level. I got 10 current certified teaching positions that are open and not filled. Not for lack of trying. We don't have people. Morale. Local, state, national, pick, you don't need to take my word for it. Ask a teacher. Ask a teacher how they're feeling about their profession at the moment. Not ours, but somebody else's. It's the hardest this has ever been, and it's not getting any easier. Retention, keeping people. It is literally the Wild West. We're purging people left and right. I broke my own rule. I told our staff we're not stealing somebody mid-year because I wouldn't want that to happen to me. Rules out the window. When we're looking at 20 kids in a classroom and saying you're either going to a study hall or I got to steal somebody and I got somebody we can steal, I had to eat some crow and some of my superintendent friends and said, sorry, but I'm taking the person, and we work it out. But they've done it to us. It's not personal anymore. It used to be, it's not. One thing that's not going to help morale, all our elementary teacher friends who just emailed me on my way over here saying, thanks for canceling PD tomorrow because I was worried about snow. Relax. We have done we've done an amazing job in this district at maintaining low class sizes, particularly at the elementary level. It's been, I am not proposing that we're going to 30 kids in a class. So everybody relax. Don't freak out on me yet, but you have to hear me out. We've been very lucky and fortunate to have the staffing to keep our class sizes as low as we can. That's been something that we've been really proud of. So we have some class sizes in elementary levels that are averaging 13, 14, 15 kids. Some are more toward 18, 19, but we try to keep that number under 20. That's sort of the magic number. The reality is, I think for the first time, our class sizes are going to have to go up. Now, I'm not going up to 25 and 30. I don't support that. But getting closer to 18, 19 as opposed to the 13, 14, that's something that I'm not going to have a choice to do at this point. It's not about money. It's not even about staff. If you gave me all the money in the world and you gave me an open season to hire 500 well-qualified teachers sitting right in front of it, I can't. I got nowhere to put them, which is the biggest challenge that I see facing us in the long term. So we need a reality check. We're full. At the elementary level, we are out of room. At Stowe, we're tapped. I couldn't come up with other adjectives. I'm currently in an arm wrestling match, a cordial one, with our friends at the town about space at Stowe. Stowe is the happiest place on earth. Anybody's ever having a bad day, go to Stowe. But somebody telling me that Stowe is not overcrowded, then clearly you haven't been to Stowe yet. The reality is, in 2 weeks, we're getting 20 more preschool special ed kids and I got no space for them. So something's got to give. If I'm being truthful, we're out of room because our buildings are old. You know, our buildings were designed in the 50s and the 60s. The world's changed. The needs of our kids have changed. People are saying, what the heck is he talking about now? Bear with me and let me try to prove it. It's going to be hard for you in the audience to see, so I'll do my best to explain what this means. But the slide in front of you right now is Henry Barnard School's layout in the 2016-2017 school year. Now, not only are our buildings old, obviously so are our maps. Because anybody remembers going through the JFK process, those maps were a heck of a lot nicer than these, but this is what we got. I particularly wanted to show 16-17 school year because at the end of the 17 school year, if you guys remember, that's when central office was at Barnard. That's when we moved out and we moved special programming over to Barnard. If you can see where it says the Northwest Wing, I'll just take you quickly through. You can see if there's a number 1, that's a first grade classroom. Where it says, anything that says P, that's a special program, and the number after the P is how many staff members were in that room. So if you look on, I could see, you guys can't, room 9, that's Northwest Wing on the top and left, it says P4. That was a resource room, full-size classroom where we had 2 dividers and we had 4 teachers in there, and they would pull kids in for instruction. They would pull kids in possibly small group, but it was pretty roomy. It was a good opportunity for kids to come in and teachers to work in a pretty quiet and spacious atmosphere. But as you go down the hallway, you'll see like room 27 directly in the middle. That was the music room. The next hallway, you can see that's the second grade. And room 24 on the northeast wing on the bottom, that's the art room. Then you get down that center corridor where the all-purpose room is. Those were program rooms with 2, so there was 2 staff members in each room. You get to the southwest wing. That's where our kindergarten rooms were. And you can see on the bottom, room 6 and 8, and again, on top of that on room 7 where it says RR, those were resource rooms. So those usually had 1 special ed teacher in, and that's when they did resource or pull-out instruction for those 1 kid. So those are full-time classrooms that we had the luxury of having 1 or in some cases 2 staff members. You can also look on the left-hand corner, P3, that's another full-size classroom that had 3 staff members in it. And then you look at the southeast wing, that's where we used to be. So you could see in the corner, there's our old conference room where some of you guys remember. Human resources, special ed, the academic office was there, and it's a weird setup over there. And then the very front row is where the superintendent's office was, the deputy superintendent at the time, Kathy's little cubby. Judy had a cubby on the other side. We had a nice closet and stuff over there, but it worked for the time. But that's what Barnard looked like, you know, a little over 5 years ago. This is what Barnard looks like now. Anything in green means it's not what it was in the 16-17 school year. So just making a comparison on the top hand left, going back to the northwest corner. So that P4, which used to be a special program, that's our OT and our PT room right now. Where in the old days, we used to have 4 staff members in there. We've got 5 staff members in that room now doing PT and OT services in the same space where we used to do pull-out instruction on. Draw your attention from the northwest wing back toward the center. On the old map, room 15, there was a 1, then there was a storage room, and then I brought to your attention room 27. You could see now where it says P5. That was the music room. That's a special program now with 5 staff members in it. The room next to it, where it says storage, has 3 staff members in it. If you go down the hall, room 18 used to be room 2. That's a program room with 5 staff members in it. One of the good things, if you look at room 24, it still says art room. Don't get used to it. It's an art room now. It's not going to be next year. Going down to the southwest wing where it says where it used to be kindergarten rooms, we had to shift some. Remember the last one that had a bunch of RRs? Those are resource rooms, were intervention. Those are actual classrooms now. So that whole room 1 through 8 are all kindergarten classrooms. The last rooms on the wings are special programs where we've got 5 and 5 staff members in respectively. If you take a look at where central office used to be, just to put in perspective on what we're utilizing this space for. The old HR office, where we used to have 2 people in there. We now have a program where we have 5 staff members working out of that office. Our old pupil services suite, where our pupil services office used to be. We now have 12 staff members working out of that space that used to have 4 people in it. We used to have what's called a tech closet, where I can say this now, back in the old days before these were mandatory, Guy used to keep all of our mouse pads and our cords. It was a closet. That closet now has resource staff members in it working out of the closet. The old academic office, that used to be where Michelle Middleton's office was, and Dr. Wiley and Dr. Burr. We used to have 4 or 5 people over there. They got 6 people working over there, and we have 1 speech language pathologist in a closet. Something on the map that just says closet, we have it listed here on storage. We have an SLP working out of a different closet over in that wing. Kathy just left. Her little cubby where she used to have to jump in to get to her desk, for those of you who remember that, that's a resource room now. Same thing with Judy's old office. The main office, I won't even get into. That's still in the center of the building, where it used to be a principal, a secretary, and then behind it used to be the nurse. Right now, we've got a principal, assistant principal, 2 secretaries, 2 nurses, and a security guard. This isn't trying to be alarming. It's just going back to what I said earlier. We don't fit. Now, this is just Henry Barnard. I can do this for 6 other places, but I've already gone pretty long. So I thought it was important, while I had your attention, that not everything in a budget process is about money. It's also about having a conversation about, can we do things differently and can we do things better? I haven't gotten into the academic piece of it, but looking at this strictly from a space perspective, when I tell people, when I have conversations outside of these meetings and says it's getting pretty tight on space, some people who've been in town for a long time will say, well, you have the same amount of kids. You're right. We do. But the needs that our kids have today are a heck of a lot different than they were 6 years ago. And the best way I could figure out on how to articulate that was to show people, this is how they lived, this is how they live now. And it's like that at all of our buildings. So what does this all mean? When it comes to the budget piece, my commitment to the community has always been, I'll work to get the number down. But there's just so many unknowns at the moment that I'm not comfortable cutting that down. The reality is, we talked about FOI stuff. I had a line item in the budget for FOI, but that means I had to take something else out. I'm not doing it. It's your budget next. I'll explain to you the process in a second. But the reality is, I'm still going to work to get this number down, but there's a lot of questions that we need to answer first. We, meaning all of us in this room right now, and all of the 11 members of the town council, we need to work together on this. I've sat through this process enough times where both bodies don't talk, and nothing good comes from that. We've been very fortunate over the last 5 budget cycles where there's an open line of communication with the board and the council. There's no surprises. Maybe they can't fund everything we're asking for, understandable. But at least we're being honest and upfront with the council about where we stand on all this. Look, I'm going to say out loud what I know everyone's thinking right now, but we probably need to start talking about what are we doing with the elementary schools. Now, I'm not proposing anything at this point, but I have to remind all of you guys, I have the easy part. I go first and I just tell you what we need. Town manager has the hard part because she not only has to meet the needs of what we're looking for, she has to meet the needs of the town. You have to remember that the town also pays for our facilities. So when we're asking, this is why I'm not being greedy, because I know she's got a giant bill to pay for a bunch of old buildings that she has to balance. So it's easy for me to say, give me 10%, I'll do some awesome things. That's great. But then are we not going to have a roof or a boiler or things along those lines? So it's a balance, which is why we need to keep that level of engagement with our colleagues on the town side up. Look, older buildings cost more to operate. That's just facts. I mean, they're not exactly energy efficient. I mean, we've got windows that aren't as energy efficient as, say, the best windows we have now at JFK and Enfield High School. If we're going to talk about new buildings, we need to see what's that going to look like. I'm saying this because I can already imagine the Facebook crowd saying, he's talking about doing this. Nope, I'm not. I'm not talking about anything. I'm talking about at some point we have to have a conversation about what direction do we want to go. Do we want to keep on this path? Then Ellen and I have to have a conversation about how much she needs to fund these buildings, and that's going to have an adverse effect on what I can ask her for to operate the buildings. Or do we want to start having a conversation amongst all of us about what's the long-term strategic plan here? Last but not least, I can't say enough, in this proposal, there are no current cuts to staff or programs. Right now, I'm not comfortable doing that because there are so many unknowns. My priority goes back to what we started with. Get our kids through this, do what's right for kids, and keep what we have. That said, I will end with this. Typically, we've had the board adopt in the same night. We've had the board wait a week. Your obligation is that we have to have this on the manager's desk by end of February. So I would ask, if you're not going to vote on this evening, that you would vote on this at your next meeting to give us time to make sure we have our ducks in a row and to give Ellen as much time to prepare to do her budget for the town council. Obviously, my work continues if you guys have questions, but the reality is this is now yours. You can do with it what you wish. If you want to add to it, you can add to it. You want to subtract to it, you can subtract to it. This is the superintendent's proposed budget. The budget that goes to the council is the Board of Ed's budget. Now, we've been fortunate that the last couple years, it's been the same thing. Surely I would endorse that, but in reality, it's yours. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm telling you this is what you need to do. Like I said, I have the best part of this job because once I say I'm done unless I have to answer your questions. So that concludes the superintendent's report and our budget presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Drezek. Item 8, audiences. Okay, due to the time and the fact that we will be discussing the budget, we're going to limit discussion to 3 minutes this evening. Just a reminder, we ask that you state your name and address. Board members cannot respond back to you during this portion of the meeting. The board members can respond during their board member comments if they choose to do so. We also cannot respond to student or personnel matters. We strongly ask that you refrain from personalities, and we strongly ask that you refrain from yelling out during audience or board members during their comments. Juliet Leith.
Hello.
Yes, yeah.
Juliet, can you hear me? Juliet Leith, 3 Catherine Road. I would like I would first like to give a very brief history of the terms separation of church and state and the walls of separation, and then to make my petition to this Board of Education to vote to keep a moment of silence as part of the opening of each Board of Education session. Our nation's founders had in mind preventing government from interfering with religion as an essential principle of religious liberty. Seeking religious liberty from the British king ultimately brought the Pilgrims to our shores. All of the framers understood that no establishment meant no national church and no government involvement in religion. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison believed that without separating the state from the church, there could be no religious freedom. Roger Williams, who founded Rhode Island in 1635, believed any government involvement in the church would corrupt the church and thus also corrupt freedom of religion. He said that an authentic church could only be possible if there was a wall or hedge of separation between government and religion. The Establishment Clause of the First Amendment separates or walls the church from state interference, not religion from politics or public life. The 14th Amendment applied the Establishment Clause to all states and not just the federal government. The 14th Amendment prohibits either advancing or inhibiting religion by government. In 2014, the United States Supreme Court decided in the case of the town of Greece, New York, versus Galloway, that the town board did not violate the Constitution by opening its meeting with prayer. When we assemble here or as we live our daily lives, we have the protected right to express and live out loud our faith as long as we do so lawfully. As the Board of Education, you have the opportunity to teach through action the seminal protection we have as United States citizens. I ask this board to continue the moment of silence, and I also encourage those board members who choose to do an invocation as they are so led. Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. Colossians 4:2. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Walter Cruzell.
Walter J. Cruzell, 21 Charnley Road. Something Chairman Gerard always said was special education was always to be funded at 100%. And I don't think we've seen 100% in 10, 15 years. So that's another point to be made with the budget, that we don't get from the state what we're supposed to get. Well said what she said, because that was one of my things, was invocation, because it's we the people, and the people is everyone. It's not we the one or two people that want this changed. It's we the people. So we the people want invocation and want moment of silence left. I mean, we already lost Christmas. We lost Good Friday. I don't, and back to the Christmas. It is a federal Christmas holiday, and for some people it's paid. I don't see people returning their money because they don't celebrate Christmas. They still get their paid holiday. Nobody returns their paid holiday money. It fell on a Sunday, but it was legally on a Monday because it's a legal holiday. But anyway. Too bad Vice Chairman Ryder isn't here. I wanted to thank him for pointing out a few people at the JFK dedication, myself and Mr. Neville. And I would like to point out Ms. Suzak also for all her work she did in the pre-ref committee. And also I want to point out all the work Mr. Ryder did during that pre-ref committee. He was setting up the PAC and getting that referendum passed. Speaking of referendums, we've had a roofer referendum over a year ago, And I've been watching the Joint Facility Committee meetings, and I haven't seen anything about hiring a architect to plan the next school roof. I mean, we're waiting to put buckets out again over at Prudence Crandall or whatever. Or, I saw pictures of standing water on Enfield Street School. And this is the time now that we have to get the architect and the designs done, and you have to appoint the Joint Facility Committee as a building committee, the town council has to, so we can apply for the grants and get our grant reimbursements, which are running at 70% still. So, and to get the work done so they can get on the roof in June and July and get it done. I've seen nothing, absolutely nothing. And that bothers me. All the work that Ms. Suzak and all of us did is not happening. So, 3 words I always say at the end of the pledge: God bless America. And I also say, God help Enfield, Connecticut. And that's something
Thank you,
I started.
Mr. Cruzel. Your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a great presentation, Joe.
Peter Janitis.
Peter Janitis, 3 Farmstead Circle. First, Bob T. Katz. He was an interesting character, to say the least. And for over 2 years, he used to call me up almost every other day talking about the going-ons of the Board of Ed, the Town Council, national politics, and above all, the history of Enfield. May he rest in peace. I'd like to congratulate the state of Iowa today for passing a law that says money in the schools will follow the students. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the good doctor on the courageous vote that he took, I think, at the last board meeting. However, the delaying tactic of the tally of vote count was unprecedented, as one member talked with the doctor and the chair allowed it to happen. I'd like to give out some kudos to the councilwoman Mangini, who at last night's town council meeting had the courage to recite the Lord's Prayer. In our Constitution, Article 1 states, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I'd like to encourage some board members to talk less about what's going on in their schools when parents of those students are duly notified of said activities at those schools. I would rather see this board talking about and informing the parents of Enfield as to what is being done to get the town of Enfield off of being on the alignment district. Talk about education and what's going on in the schools. And finally, I'd like to recommend that this board that there are some students at Enfield High School that are highly offended at some 3x5 flags that are being displayed in a science classroom. It was explained to me that these flags represent a designated safe place for a certain group of students. I would think that there must be a less intrusive way of identifying these areas. Remember, what we do in our schools is for all the students. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Janitis. Okay, I'm going to try to say your last name correctly. Marilyn. I'm sorry. Coles. I almost said Carvella. It looks like a V, so I apologize. Marilyn Coles. Thank you. You have very neat writing. I thought it was Cavello.
Oh, I often say it's the store. Just don't spell it that way.
I heard you say that, but I wasn't.
That's okay.
I thought you said next door.
My name is Marilyn Coles, and I live at 26 Fletcher Road. And I have to say, I'm so glad I was a teacher and not a superintendent, because I wouldn't want to do that. So just a couple of thoughts. I've been sitting in the back 40 for about a year now, and I have some observations. We are elected Democrats, and you're elected Republicans, and you ran on that platform. But when you came here as a group, you represent, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, the district that you ran for. I might be a Republican in your district or a Democrat, but it's not your personal point of view that you should be representing. My question to you is, do you ask the residents of who you represent, what are your thoughts on this? And if the majority of their thoughts are different than what yours are, how would that affect your vote? That's a large concern. I see a lot of partisanness going on, and that's not what you're here for. You're here for the betterment of the students' education, and that bothers me. Next thing I had is I sat here especially last year during the COVID, and I saw an awful lot of parents involved, and I thought that was wonderful. There's not many more things that you want as an educator than to have parents involved in their child's education and what's affecting them. And they shared their opinions, and they shared their thoughts, and they shared their facts. They might not be what your opinions, thoughts, or facts were, but they shared them. And I think that it was a missed opportunity on the board's part to engage in a proper discussion with them, whether you thought what they were saying was right or not. It would have been a great way to engage and bring the community together to have a discussion. It doesn't matter what your opinions are, whether you agree or disagree. At least it would lead to discourse where you wouldn't be having the friction between both. And lastly, as you consider the curriculum, would you please, please, please read the curriculum carefully? And when you do that, would you ask yourself two questions? One, would you want yourself, your child, or your grandchild to learn that information? Is that appropriate for them? Is it going to be beneficial for them? Second question, how will that curriculum help to produce a well-rounded, informed, and responsible educated citizen of Enfield? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Coles. Maureen Griffin?
Hi, Maureen Griffin, 98 Abbey Road. First off, pass the budget as is. He's the professional. He knows what the heck we need, and he's right. The kids are suffering. If we do happen to get more through ECS, don't take back. Let him use it as needed where he understands the needs are. The needs of our kids are much different than when I was young, when you guys were young. Out of district placement happens more and more because our kids are suffering. And they're suffering in the very earliest years of their lives. And that's what you're seeing play out. They need the support. The schools need the support. If you were to go into a school that is designed specifically for extremely high needs children, you would see it set up completely differently than the elementary schools currently are, because the needs are nothing like they were in the 50s and 60s. The money needs to be there. The long-term plan needs to be there. To accept the fact that we're not in the 50s, most homes in our country are not what they were in the 50s. They're just not. You may like it, you may not, you may be neutral on it. But that's the reality our children are in, and they need things to be set up to meet their needs, not our wish fors. The FOIA costs, that made me quite angry. That all comes from our kids being used as political pawns. I've said it before. I'm going to keep saying it until you start understanding. Your job is to serve our children, not to use our children. what Peter said about the Safe Place flag, the kids that's reaching out to, they need support. They need to know that there's a place that they can just let down their guard. It's not hurting the other children to look at it. It's not saying, oh, come and become whatever the flag is talking to. Let children be supported, let their needs be served, and stop using our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Griffin. Audiences are now closed. We're moving on to 9 board member comments. Ms. Acree?
I have announcements for Prudence Crandall from Principal Dupere. He would like to inform everyone, due to impending winter weather storm expected Wednesday, tomorrow, the 25th, they will hold the Literacy Numeracy event on the snow date, which will be next Wednesday, February 1st. It's also, February 1st is also World Read Aloud Day. And he's hoping all families that have turned in their RSVPs will be able to attend next Wednesday. There is a Prudence Crandall Winter Chorus and Instrumental Concert at Enfield High School this Thursday, January 26 at 6:30 p.m. Students are currently taking their iReady winter diagnostic at Crandall in math and reading. It says we have already seen some amazing growth in the school from our students, which is something good because people are concerned about how the students are doing and their scores. So Mr. Dupere said at Prudence Crandall, it looks good. Parents, please be on the lookout for a report and a letter explaining your child's report. And I'm going to add that I am looking forward to attending the Winter Prudence Crandall Instrumental and Chorus Concert. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Acree. I'm new to this budget talking, so I'm just trying to get my ducks in a row. So I apologize for that if I was being rude. Can I just ask a procedural question? I'm sorry to interrupt our board member comments, but on the discussion and action regarding the budget, if we were not prepared to vote on it, would we still discuss it and ask our questions through then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, traditionally, how would like? Yes, you obviously can have a discussion tonight. If you choose to take a vote, you can. If you don't, if there's questions I can answer, but just recall the way that we've usually handled questions is if there's questions I can't answer this evening right out of the gate, that the questions would all get full. I'm glad I did Walter leave. You remember we did this one time where all the questions had to go to Walter, and we went downstairs at our office and we had the whole conference room and we went through the process and answered them. That they funnel them through, any questions that get funneled through the chair so I can respond to the entire board.
Right, so I can say discussion and action regarding, so I can just start with discussion without making a motion and we can have the discussion.
Yeah, it's on there in the event you wanted to take action, but you don't have to.
All right,
I would just ask that
I just had a
you
board
take it
member
by
that,
next meeting.
Yeah, there was some clarification that a board member wanted when they should ask their budget questions, and they didn't know if it should be through their board member comment or during the discussion.
Yeah, and
so.
by now I failed to mention that Andy has sent you the actual numbers. You
Okay.
should have received that in your emails.
Okay, all right. Sure.
I saw that Andy had sent that. Would we be provided a hard copy of that?
If you request one, yeah. We try to do it electronically, but if anybody wants a hard copy, we can get one for you.
All right, so I apologize for getting off track, everyone. I'm sorry. I just wanted to clarify some procedural things. Okay, so we're moving on to Dr. Kalnin for board member comments.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation, Chris. It was really good. I was particularly heartened to hear about your emphasis on health and safety. And in order to have a good education, kids have to be healthy, but the converse of that is, in order to be healthy, kids have to learn to be healthy. And apropos of that, I guess what I'm really getting at is health should be an integral part of our school curriculum. And I don't know anything about that. I'm not sure exactly how much of the curriculum is dedicated to healthcare. And so that's something that maybe we could talk about in the curriculum committee, just to. Also, I'm really happy to hear that you're going to do everything in your power to continue free lunches for our kids. That's awfully important. And finally, if by some miracle we should hit a windfall and we get millions and millions of dollars from the state, I'm kind of hoping, now that we're thinking about what to do with our buildings, I really hope that at some point we can place a high priority on expansion of the Stowe Early Learning Center. And I know we can't think about that right now, but if the opportunity should present itself, it's really important, because there are so many families that cannot afford high-quality childcare, and the Stowe Early Learning Center provides an opportunity for them. But it's such a small program, only I think 102 children for Head Start and 28 for ECDC. And we really, considering the finances of the time, we really have to start thinking about expanding our early learning capabilities. I realize we can't do that right now, but just I think that should be, when the time comes, that should be at the top of our list of priorities. So, apropos of that, the 2Gen meeting committee met on January 19th, and the one item on the agenda was to discuss how to engage the business community in a discussion about the best ways to make affordable child care available to Enfield working families. And the format has yet to be determined, but it will most likely be a breakfast sponsored by the Enfield Chamber of Commerce. As you probably know, the Chamber is a co-leader of 2Gen along with Kite, and the logical plan would be for the Chamber to serve as the sponsor of this event. So 2Gen will also be searching for models of community advocacy for affordable childcare. But a good place to start would be to ask representatives from the business community to share their ideas. And the time of the meeting is currently being considered, but it's probably going to be either in late August or early September. And the date of the next 2Gen meeting, I believe, is March the 2nd. And that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Kalnin. Ms. Cushman?
Though many of our audience members have left who spoke, I just wanted to thank those who came, and even thank those who send us emails that just share your thoughts and things for us to consider and encourage us. And I do look forward to our policy committee meeting next week, as we will have an opportunity to discuss some of those policies that went back to committee. And I appreciate the comments that were shared tonight about those. And one of the emails that we recently received that I appreciate getting was from Ms. Marr regarding the Buzz Robotics. And after Mr. Ungeyer shared about their trip to Boston, it was fun to get to be introduced to the different members of the Buzz Robotics team and all that they're doing to prepare. And I look forward to them coming as a board guest and hope that they can even bring their robot this year. I don't know if that's possible, but it'd be fun to see. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hamry?
Thank you. I'm going to start off with the JFK PTO update as usual, and thanks again to Leslie for forwarding this. JFK PTO report cards are going to be, the student report cards are going to be on the PowerSchool coming this Friday, so watch for those. The next PTO meeting is going to be February 8th. It's a Wednesday. That's going to be at 6:30, and I believe that's a Zoom meeting, so check your JFK PTO website for details. The next PTO fundraiser is going to be the winter fundraiser. It starts February 1st, and in honor of National Kindness Day, students will be completing acts of kindness for the first 2 weeks. Again, a lot more information will be available on the JFK PTO website for that. Second up, I want to mention the Parent Leadership Academy still enrolling new attendees for the upcoming course that kicks off with an orientation on February 4th. This particular program is a program that provides parents, grandparents, and guardians with leadership skills, how to run productive, effective meetings, understanding and managing conflict, things like that. Really invaluable workshops that they provide, and they provide it free of charge through generous grants that provide this to the parents, grandparents, guardians here in Enfield. One of the best things about this as a graduate of Class 10 is that this program provides meals for the attendees as well as the children that may attend, and that child care that would be provided to those children is free of charge as well. Again, because this program has historically and provided that proof that it works, that it provides the information and that tool for the parents, grandparents, guardians to become more actively involved in the civic process, more effective local leaders, and all that goes with that. So if you want to learn more about that, please contact Melissa Griffith at mgriffith.enfield.org. You can also apply at enfieldkite.org. Again, enfieldkite.org. We'll talk about the ECAC later on. One of the big things coming up I'm very excited for is the next meeting of the Enfield High School's Instrumental Music Association. They're going to be having a meeting on February 7th. One of the best things about this meeting is that they're going to be discussing the opening up the bylaws, or I believe that's the phrase, to the chorus community, the chorus classes, to include them in the EMA, Enfield Instrumental Music Association, which would expand that experience for the students that are both musicians and vocalists to combine their art. And I look forward to that conversation to see if they're willing to make that happen. I also want to pass my condolences along to the family, friends of Mr. Tikaz. I've been in this room countless times where he's been present for the discussions around budget mostly, and everything else that goes along with the running of the town and the Board of Ed. And to say he was a fixture in these meetings is an understatement. So from my experiences of being in the audience and watching him present his very thoughtful, methodical, detailed assessments of everything he wanted to speak about, it was noticeable. And again, condolences to everybody that is missing him today. I do have some comments about the presentation from Superintendent, and I'll hold those till the appropriate time. And I will say this much: it was a very innovative presentation. I liked it a lot, and it was eye-opening to the needs that we have and the transitions that have been happening over the last year or so to pivot the attention to the students that need it, which is, well, everybody, all the students need it, but providing them that personalized attention more and more, and so on. To that point, or rather separately, Enfield Pride and Enfield PFLAG are organizations that help support the LGBTQ community. Those organizations have been taking off in the last half a year or so, and they're really starting to gain some traction, which lends itself to the belief that there is an audience. There's a community that does need that support that goes along with being unable to be their true selves. So if you're interested in learning more about that, find information on Facebook or the social media platforms for both Enfield Pride and Enfield PFLAG. One thing I could say about Enfield PFLAG as a quick update is that they are going to be moving a monthly or bi-monthly meeting to as Nantucket to give more space to the community that wants to get together and support each other. with a focus on, by the way, PFLAG is for the parents and again, guardians, things like that, to understand what their child or children or grandchildren are going through and helping them with that process of becoming who they are. So look for more information from them about the on their social media pages again, Enfield Pride, Enfield PFLAG. And I'll hold off on the remainder of the comments till later on in the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamry. Mr. LeBlanc?
So, thanks for the presentation. I think overall, we get so caught up in day-to-day activities and thoughts and opinions on everything that we get lost in the fact that we got to remember this is the next generation coming up, and considering what they've gone through and how we're going to adapt so that they can be successful to, carry forward after us. I think the proposal and the direction it's going not only takes into account the current needs, but also future needs into not only the next year, next 5 years, but next 20, 30, 40. And we'll see where it all rests. You did bring up, I did want to mention, because it was in the presentation about the technology aspect, and you kind of hinted at what, like Mr. Neville said, and there was a comment made after the JFK public tour of somebody I know who works at Asnuntuck, and they mentioned that the technology components to JFK outdid what is over even at the community college in town. So, when that comment was made to me, I'm like, wow, that's pretty impressive to have somebody who works at a community college, say a middle school level technological department, and courses are on par with a college level. There was one comment tonight. It was former Chairman Cruzel about the roofs and whatnot, and I would have to agree. I understand where he's coming from, but I think, based on what the presentation said tonight and how we outlook things moving forward, just trying to balance what immediate needs are versus long-term goals. And yes, I agree. I mean, troublesome issues, we have to water on the floor should not be happening. But immediate fixes and long-term goals, balance them out, and we'll see where things stand. I think that's it for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. LeBlanc. Mr. Ungary?
So, excuse me, I'd like to start by thanking the superintendent. Fine job with your budget presentation. Thank you. And want to thank everybody who came up and spoke here this evening. You all made some very good points, and I appreciate that. One thing caught my attention in particular is Juliette Leith, when in her talk, she cited a judicial case that apparently supports Board of Education prayer. Now, I'm studying this issue and trying to better understand it from a legal perspective. So I'm going to go back and take a closer look at these cases and try to get a better understanding of what the law says about that. And with regard to Hazardville Memorial, really the only news is that the next PTO meeting is on February 23rd. And lastly, you may recall that sometime just before Christmas, right around Christmas time, I had read an article from Reader's Digest, a very heartwarming article. And after that, the Madam Chair had challenged the board here and said, why don't we, in the spirit of unity and building a working relationship and learning respect for one another, why don't we look at, trying to write us here on the board, write something good about each other, right? So, I mean, that was your challenge to us. So, our caucus here talked about that, and we've agreed to do that, and so we're working on it. Okay, so I want to let you know that, and we'll keep you informed and advised as to how we're going to communicate that. Okay? Great. Thank you.
Ms. Pickett?
All right. I'm got a lot, so I hope to not be all over the place. The first thing, as a K2 parent, all K5 families should have received a survey regarding conferences. I was incredibly excited to see this. Chris, I don't know if it's related at all to your parent advisory work or what, but I know I've had lots of conversations with families around parent conferences or family conferences, when they would be useful, when information could be helpful to be shared. Our teachers do an amazing job right now. This is not at all about our current structure, but my hope is that families do complete that survey, and that survey is used to think about some innovative and creative approaches to family partnerships. So I'm urging families to please complete that survey, because I think it's a great way that the district is trying to get our feedback on what we would like to see happen. I know I mentioned last time during policy discussion around district teams, and I'm just wondering, Chris, thinking about your budget presentation tonight and your very thoughtful way of how you've done board presentations thus far with equity and SEL and our leadership, I think that was really thoughtfully done. I'd love to know, how are we kind of building capacity and support and really practicing some shared leadership so all staff could be involved in some decision making, and how we're creating some consistency throughout our district. So I'd like to kind of, maybe as we go through the rest of the year, hear more about kind of what that looks like in action. Related to my school updates, Enfield Street School, things are looking better for morning drop-off safety, but I will tell you, it's gotten scary out there. So I'm just going to take this moment to thank the leadership for their responsiveness to parents' concerns regarding drop-off, especially safety. I was really hoping that the repaved parking lot was going to solve a lot of the issues. However, it's obvious that space is a continued problem. But it is really imperative that families at drop-off, we are all in a rush. I get it. But there are rules and protocols for a reason. So 3 cars should park where the old crosswalk is. I have asked for, it would be great if DPW could paint a drop-off zone. Wink, wink. But our school is doing some creative, innovative things, but 3 cars should fit there. You should wait your turn, not let your kids out before that 3-car drop-off spot, and they should be exiting from the passenger side of the car. It is scary to be there in the morning and see cars flying in and out of there with kids exiting, and our staff are doing the best that they can, but I'm really asking for everybody to be diligent in the parking lot. There is an upcoming Someone Special dance. My children did not get to decide who they were inviting. Mom and Dad decided. That's happening on February 10th, and there's lots of upcoming assemblies. Again, I'm just going to reiterate the principal newsletter and the PTO, Enfield PTO website. ERFC also has lots of upcoming programs happening in February. Please check out their website, erfcinc.org, to find out about their preschool programs, K3 programs, 2 to 5 programs, basketball programs. Summer camp registration is going to be upcoming, so definitely check out ERFC. I do want to mention a couple of things that I haven't spoken a lot during our last discussion about. The policy, especially the policy around invocation moment of silence, but I'm going to take my moment now to address this. Chris, thank you for putting the equity statement up this morning, because I think that's a good grounding point for this conversation. We believe every child is unique, and the diversity of our students is what makes Enfield Public Schools exceptional. To thrive and excel, all are welcomed, accepted, respected, and supported. So if you look at our track record, we're not doing a great job of being inclusive in this portion of our agenda. It's clear, so for those of you wondering about this policy, in our bylaws, it states our agenda items, and it leads a description on the right-hand side of what those agenda items are. And for agenda item 2, invocation or moment of silence, and for agenda item 3, pledge of allegiance, it says self-explanatory next to it. It's obvious that this is no longer self-explanatory. It's not explicit enough. Our track record has been a whole lot of God, Jesus, and Lord. I believe in God. I am Catholic. I believe in Jesus Christ. However, in this chambers, as a Board of Ed, we represent all students of Enfield. So when 90% of our invocations only honor one faith, we have to think critically about what does that say to all of our students. So I am not against a moment of silence, although I think there needs to be a clear explanation of what that means and possibly a script to follow. And And that also leads to some upcoming conversations that I know we're going to have around school calendar. Walter mentioned it tonight as far as the adjustments that were made last year. That was not to remove Christmas. I celebrate Christmas. Christmas is still on the calendar. It was a change in the name of the break. Again, I would like to see it be done differently, where we can actually celebrate and acknowledge all holidays, where Christmas can exist on our calendar along with Eid and all the other celebrations that exist in our community that we don't acknowledge on our calendar. So I would love to see a way that we could acknowledge the various cultural celebrations that take place in our community. There's lots of other districts who do this, and I think there's some models we could add. This also links to the conference discussion that we had around the survey sent out. I would love to see a second official conference added to our school calendar. I'll save my budget conversation for later on. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Pickett. I do have a couple of announcements that school groups asked me to make this evening. First is Safegrad. They will be hosting an 80s dance coming up on Saturday, March 18th at the American Legion. There will be prizes, awards for best dressed, so 80s attire is encouraged. Tickets will go on sale by the end of the week. They are also looking for any 80s games or toys anyone might be willing to donate or use them as decorations. Reach out to EHS Safegrad 2023@gmail.com, and they will arrange someone to pick them up. So that's a message from Safegrad. Also, EMA asked me to give an announcement for their upcoming activities, and they are having the Enfield, EMA means the Enfield Instrumental Music Association, and he said, you know what, you guys give all these updates for everybody else. Would you send out updates for us? I said, yeah, of course. So they are having a comedy fundraiser featuring top local comedians to benefit the Sound of Laughter, to benefit EMA, on Saturday, January 28th at the Elks Lodge. Doors open at 5, show starts at 6. There's a dinner buffet included, cash bar, raffles, 50/50 drawing, auctions, and it's an 18-plus event. Tickets are $35. And they also have they're going to be communicating with Scott to get this up on the PTO pages. They do have a square if you want to sponsor or donate. The other item that they wanted me to let everyone know about is on February 4th, members of the Enfield High School Band, Orchestra, and Chorus who were previously selected to play at the CMEA Regional Music Festival will be auditioning to play in the CMEA All-State Music Festival held in March. So that's exciting. And there's just one caveat that I would like to add that is in this email. It says CMEA is the Connecticut Music Educators Association, and they are dedicated to providing programs and activities for professional educators, students, and future music educators, striving to enhance the quality of music education for all children. So that is from EMA. I have Safegrad. I wanted to mention the JFK dedication. What a beautiful building. But also mentioning, like Mr. LeBlanc did, the technology that is available into that building. The other thing that's a little bit different about JFK compared to Enfield High is it's for grades 6 through 12. So the rooms are a little bit different, but it's a beautiful school, and I hope the students enjoy it, and I feel the money was well spent on that school. So I appreciate all the hard work that went into the JFK school building. I had a communication from a parent, and it's kind of going to Dr. Jerry and Jean, and she got the survey. Her student got the survey, or she was asking about the survey the students were going to get in the middle school and high school, and I thought I'd bring this to your attention because you guys are involved in the mental health committee. She wanted to know if there's being studies or is it a suggestion to find out the effect technology and social media is having on mental health and the use of technology. She feels that social media and the use of technology is really behind of a lot of mental health issues, and that should be one thing we're focusing on as well, along with the other mental health issues that seem to be at the forefront. She felt that technology should be at the forefront as well. I agree. I told her that I was going to bring it to both of your attention, and I knew you guys would research it or have some information when you do attend any mental health meetings. But I thought that was a very good observation by a parent and with kids in our schools. So I appreciate her reaching out to me and asking me to convey that. I do want to say one thing. So we hear about the buses on the road. Yesterday I was driving and it was a little slippery. Smith Bus, if you're listening, whoever drives bus 942, I saw that car pull out in front of you. You did very well. You were not going over the speed limit, but thank you for keeping those kids safe because that car cut right out in front of you and they knew they did it. So bus 942, thank you for keeping our kids safe. I appreciate that. Lastly, I'm not going to talk much longer, but we were challenged by a parent to say, so it's fine that you guys come and you say all this stuff about what your schools are doing, but what have you witnessed? Have you ever been a part of something as a board member that you witnessed that you would share? And so I ran SafeGrad for the 2022 class, and this is to kind of highlight how far our staff and administrators go in this district. We had a senior student at the Eagle Academy, and for whatever reason, did not get the correspondence to sign up for SafeGrad in time. So this administrator reached out and said, what do we do to get this person to SafeGrad? Can you tell me what to do? It has to happen. They didn't get the correspondence. So we gave all the information. She goes, the other problem is the transportation we're going to have to provide for this student. The student lives in Hartford. So what happens with SafeGrad? I said, well, we leave after graduation. We come home at 5 in the morning. And she said, all right, we're going to have to figure this out because we don't want transportation to be an issue for this student. And they got the appropriate paperwork in, and then she messaged me and she said, so when you guys get back at 5 o'clock, we're going to be there to get him off the bus, and we're going to bring him to Eagle Academy. And this student can sleep, eat, whatever, and then in order to get this student back to their home, we've arranged with the bus from Hartford dropping kids off to bring him back home so that he can attend because he didn't have transportation otherwise. And this is the extra mile that our administrators and teachers go through on a daily basis that we never see or hear about. And to me, that is more stuff we need to hear about that is actually going on in our schools, that these teachers came in early and wanted to make sure that SafeGrad was equitable and possible for every student that they could help. And it was a great night. I believe that student won a raffle prize. And from what I know, they went back into Eagle Academy and slept until it was time to get up and go on the bus back home. So that is one of the stories I wanted to share with you. And that is all I have for this evening. So we're going to move on in the agenda, which is a lot of papers here tonight. Okay, item 10, unfinished business, we have none. Item 11, new business, discussion and action regarding the fiscal year 2023-2024 budget. Does anybody have any questions or who would like to start? Mr. Hamry?
One of the first questions I had was kind of a basic one. Mr. Dresnick, you said that there was the two issues at the state level, the legislative issues. If it is passed, I think you gave the answer in a follow-up comment you made, but would that money, if it's made available based on that legislation, be available in June, or does that come later on?
Right now, you're looking at the 25 school year.
So
at least the way it's written now, but that's one of the unknowns is if there's momentum for a particular bill. The way it's written, it would take effect in the 25 fiscal year, which is a year from now.
Okay.
But we've heard rumblings that people may say they want this included in the current fiscal year. So it's just so early. But
so
yes.
it wouldn't necessarily be any immediate relief on giving you a cushion to work with.
Current one now, no, I wouldn't anticipate that, but you don't really know.
Okay. And I just, the phrase, every once in a while during these presentations and the conversations, your discussions, certain phrases jump out like arrows. You mentioned transitional regression and the specific grade levels, 30, it's amazing to put into context the budget and seeing through my experiences in the schools, the almost tangible impact of the last 3 years worth of changes that these students have had to go through rather, and to the point about the aging elementary schools. My children went through those schools, and it was a challenge back then. So I appreciate that conversation becoming part of this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Hamry. Does anyone else have any specific questions? Ms. Pickett?
Sorry, Chris knows he's got to hear from me. Sorry, Chris. First, actually, thank you. I think I had made a comment about having an understanding of how we were meeting the needs based on the data that we saw, and I think your budget did a great job of demonstrating the connection to the data and the supports and structures that you have in place. I think one of the most exciting things I saw in your presentation was this long-term strategic planning. As you know, I've been advocating for that too, as far as what is our strategic goals, how are we moving towards that. I want to be clear, I'm completely supportive of discussing our elementary school model and variations in that, but I also think the long-term strategic planning has to be more than just a redesign of schools, and actually thinking about how are we meeting the needs of our students. And one of the things that I think was really kind of concerning in your presentation was the special ed considerations, which I know is always challenging to budget for because it's ever changing, and like a student can move into district tomorrow and your budget's blown out of the water. So I totally understand that need, but I also just can't help but think about our need to do Tier 1 universal instruction a bit differently. Our data that Michelle Middleton shared at that presentation, it is clear that it's not just our high need students who are struggling, it's everybody. So I would really like to have some better understandings around kind of the Tier 1 supports. And I guess what I'm going to ask, my question to you is, when you mentioned this is kind of same budget, just with an increase for inflation, is there a change in programming or services offered through the budget?
Everything's connected, so there could be. I'm surprised no one asked the question yet. When I mentioned the class sizes increasing or decreasing, the net result, someone watching at home may say, well, if you're consolidating a class because you need the space, what happens to the staff member? It's very clear I have no intention on losing any staff members. But I think, and it's really at the infancy stage at the moment, because again, there's so many unknowns, is how do we better utilize staff that we have to meet the needs of the kids that we have today? So one of the things we talked about last week was doing some direct targeted intervention for those kids in transitional years, and then expanding upon that if we have. Again, I think I said earlier, I'm not in the prediction business. One thing I'm fairly confident, though, is once this program gets up and running, and even though it's only 6 weeks, it's going to work. So the follow-up to that is going to be, well, if we have the data that shows it worked, we know we don't have the ability to integrate that during the current day now, but how do we do that for next year? So yes, but I can't definitively answer that because that's how much I need to keep what I have. And then what we've done a very good job over the last several years was working for within what we have. So we talk about Eagle Academy. We didn't get a budget increase when we created Eagle Academy. We made it work with existing resources. We had transition rooms, different from transitional grades, but transitional rooms for behavioral issues that we dealt with. If we have the same amount, we're not adverse to looking at better utilizing the funds and the services that we have and touching upon all those areas that you referenced earlier. There's a big discussion about reading we have to have. It's not in there. That's probably on your list.
Was my next question.
There's no money for reading in there. Are you guys all familiar with the reading issue? Okay.
Yes,
I don't want to
we've had some discussion in curriculum.
I wasn't there, so I'm sure you're. I have applied, not for a waiver, but for an extension. I am not adverse. First of all, I take fundamentally an issue that I don't believe reading is defined by a program. So the state telling us that we have to have a program, I don't believe reading instruction is tied to a program. That said, and this has been an ongoing philosophical discussion I've had with our humanities folks, I'm not adverse to looking at things differently. The problem is I take issue with the process on how this was delivered to us, meaning it gets snuck in a bill That's why I said about the bill that you asked about, Mr. Hamry, like, I don't know. You don't know what's going to, look, we had Alliance money until the bill finally went through. I don't know what happens in the midnight hour down there. But going back to the reading piece, I don't have a problem at looking at it differently and restructuring it differently. I have a problem in July, August being told, oh, you can't use what you currently have anymore. We talked about professional development. Every teacher in the district for the last 10 years has been trained in the current reading and writing program that we have. I can't reinvent. We get 5 days. I can't retrain our entire district on a new reading program because the state said you could pick from one of these 6, and guess which one's not on your list? On the 6th, the one you have. So I'm not adverse to it, and I know Michelle and I have talked at length about it. My issue was the timing and the resources, and right now the decision was made, and we had 2 options, essentially. Comply, 3 options. Comply, blow up what you're doing and buy a new reading program. You're going to see a lot of numbers. I'm jumping all over the place here, but in case somebody asked this, the average increase from a superintendent during this cycle is 4.62, in case anyone cares. I know some colleagues who decided to move forward with new reading programs, but their budget increase came in double digits. It's expensive. So that was option 1. Option 2 was to ask for a waiver, meaning tell the state we're not going to do it, but we're going to show you our data as to why we don't have to do it. Or 3 is to ask for an extension. I opted to ask for an extension because I don't know the right answer. None of this was properly vetted as far as I'm concerned. But yes, we need to relook at everything. There are a lot of areas. I don't want to keep painting pictures of, well, we don't do this well, so we're going to revamp it. One of the things, this is not academic necessarily presentation, but I mean, you guys saw the academic. Let's talk about what we're doing in science. So it's not all your numbers are down, your numbers are down. Take a look at what's been consistently going up in science across the district. We're killing it in science. Part of the question is, okay, what are they doing throughout the science department that maybe we can translate into other areas? Talking about central office restructure. Now having somebody at central office who could go over and say, okay, this is working here. Let me go figure out how we translate that somewhere else. And let me, not having, the Grim Reaper from central office coming and sitting in my classroom, but someone who's going to show me what's working and how we can translate into that. So it is a fundamental shift. Did I answer that?
You did. Thank you, Chris. I think that was my my concern was it's obvious that we have to change some of our practices, and I don't want the budget to be a constraint to changing some of those ways that we coach and support our staff, provide interventions to our students. I mentioned dreaming big because I would like to see, how we do things even in a more robust way. I understand the constraints you're in. I would second anybody's comment that says if we get any additional funding, we keep all that additional funding and use it. It's not to return it to our partners. But with that in mind, and just a couple closing statements about the budget is, I'm going to also stress this partnership. I think we need to really ensure that we're partnering with the town and our community. I loved the idea of stretching funds. We have to work smarter, not harder, and think about how we're streamlining supports and services. My other kind of just word of caution, I love the way you broke out the budget. One kind of worry I have is folks see that opportunity and access budget and see this as an easy cut area. I'm going to say no. If we are truly committed to equity and if we truly understand the needs of whole child wellness, this is actually an area we should look at expanding and supporting even more. So I just wanted to put that one out there. And then I know we had an updated teacher contract. My assumption is that's included in this budget. But I'm also wondering about our other staff, such as paras, and if there's any creative ways, I know we're under constraints with budgets, that we can provide stipends, incentives to staff who go above and beyond and do
if
report the call of action.
Employees, that all has to be collectively bargained.
Okay, perfect. Well, just saying, our staff deserve some love. And thank you again for your redesign, and I'm anxious to look more in depth in it.
Anyone else? No. Okay, I'm going to have a few things and then we'll end with this. So what I'm finding is the average student, if they enter kindergarten in Enfield, by the time they get to high school, the high school is their 4th school. So they K through 2,
Unless
3
you go
through
to
5,
Stowe,
J.
yeah. Could be 5 if you go to Stowe.
If you go to Stowe, it'll be 5. And we're seeing the issues with those transitional years. As you pointed out, Michelle has talked about it. The one thing that has concerned me from the time that we did the consolidation is the space in the schools. We've seen that the schools are, I think we're at max capacity. There's really not much more we can do. The other day, the vice principal from Crandall was out not using her office. The dental clinic was in her office. We just don't have any space in these schools. The other issue is the building structures and the building age. How much do you invest into buildings that are 80s and 90 years old? And then I feel like every time we turn around, we have to add, not a bad problem, like you said, add another class. We have 20 more kids coming to Stowe. The Eagle Academy is maxed out. I just think it's time to start looking at a bigger picture. We've done this for 10 years now. But the next step, it's something we have to start looking at, I think, as a district, because we are out of space. We are out of sound buildings. And long-term is really what we need to focus on, because our numbers are going up. And I think they will go up we saw them go up after the high school was redone, and we will see them go up after JFK was done. I'm sorry, Josh, if you asked this. Am I misunderstood in thinking that the state is working on a bill to have free lunch for all kids in the state of Connecticut, or?
I don't have that. There is some rumblings.
Okay.
One of two things: either to have a bill through the legislative process, and I don't have this definitively. As I said, I just heard this conversationally. That would essentially make lunch for free for all students. There's also other conversations I've heard, and again, I don't have anything concrete, is that those COVID funds that I referenced that we had, and we have it all kind of mapped out, there are some COVID funds that are expiring that the state has their hands on. And there's a strong lobby for the state to say, give that money to school districts so they can cover free lunch for the rest of at least this year. So there are multiple conversations happening around free lunch. If I had to venture a guess, again, not in the prediction business, I could see free lunch. I could see lunch becoming universally free for all kids, especially coming out of what we came out of. That's just a guess on my part.
Okay, interesting. I guess a comment that I have is that, I've not seen a budget presentation that's been over maybe 2% since I've been sitting up here, and all of our budgets are maintains. We want to preserve staffing and not cut programs. It's just hard to envision when things are growing and finding unique ways to do that, because it's great to maintain, but I'd love to enhance. So that's just a thought that I want to put out there. But it's all about fiscal responsibility and people that are living on tight budgets right now, whether they're retired or families. Families are living on tight budgets right now. So I appreciate your thoughtful approach to the budget. We got it tonight. I love that it's differently laid out, because I feel like in the past, board members might ask, what's the state mandated number? What's this? What's that? So I think if I understand correctly from Mr. LeBlanc and Mr. Ungeyer and my board, we're going to review your questions. You were going to review the attachment that Andy sent us. And then what I would like the board to do is, if we could submit questions, you submit them through me, and I'll get them to Mr. Drezek, and then, potentially plan to vote on this at our first meeting in February. That'll give us 2 weeks' time to review and get the questions out. So I definitely think that's something. If you don't think that's attainable or will work, please let me know. But it'll give you time to look through this new budget presentation and see how it's broken out, and let us know if you have any questions. Does that sound good? Okay. Moving on to action, if any, regarding Nathan Hale Elementary School. Mr. Drezek.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you're aware, as I pointed out, Nathan Hale is not used currently as an existing everyday elementary school. However, it is still under the purview of the Board of Education. We have not turned the building back over to the town. You don't own it, the town owns it, but as long as it's still under the purview of the board, the town doesn't have the right to do anything with the building until they get the okay from you. That said, it was requested of us that we put it on and have the board consider formally returning. Right now, we're utilizing some space there, which is all allowing us to legally keep it under the board's control. We've been told that the council has a potential suitor for the property. But in order to go down that road, the council would need to assume the ownership of the property again. So it would require the board to make a motion and hand the building back over to the town. Once the council accepts it, that would start the clock for the process with the state.
Okay, do I have a motion to release Nathan Hale back to the town of Enfield? We'll
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Pickett.
Seconded.
Second by Dr. Kalnin. Okay, now we go into discussion. Yep.
So there's somebody who's interested in procuring the building, and so we look at turning it over to them. My question is, could we wait to see if they have a signed agreement, a purchase agreement? Is there a signed purchase agreement in place? And then we could turn it over, because I understand that apparently we're keeping the school open for storage or whatever for a purpose, for a reason, and we may want to keep it that way. So if we turn it over to the town, and that real estate agreement or that real estate interest, let's say, falls apart, and now there is no buyer, then is there now a risk that the town would end up owing money against that building?
It's possible. So although the building and the renovations to the existing elementary schools have been occupied beyond 20 years, in reality, in the eyes of the state, when you get reimbursement for those projects, if the change of use for the building is beyond what you had agreed to when you received the state funding, there's an amortization schedule that you would have to pay back a portion of that. So in this particular case, we're almost at all of our additions in our elementary schools. Unfortunately, the end date is 2025, even though I started working at Barnard in 2004, and the gym and the library were already well occupied. It's not when you occupy them, it's when the project is finally signed over. So the end date is 2025. That said, there may be some funding that the state would require the town or us to repay because we didn't stay in that facility for 20 years under the use that we had agreed. That said, I think that's part of the conversation that the leadership at the town has when they're negotiating about a potential suitor for a facility. I'm not aware of really who it is or how serious. I don't know if we have the right to ask for a signed agreement. The question that was posed to us was, if you're not using it, give it back and we're going to try to sell it. But that could warrant a further conversation with board and council leadership, especially as we're getting into this process. Or it could just be, do I have a use for the building anymore besides storage? And that was the question posed to me, and the answer was no. I don't know if that answered your question. So
No, I just wonder, in your...
I don't know if there's a signed purchase agreement. I don't believe there is at the moment. I will say, in the event that it is determined that there was some payback on the building,
Right.
there is an appeal process to the state of Connecticut. I had a conversation with representatives from DAS that outlined what that process would be. Although no one will give you a guarantee, the process is you can apply for a waiver of that penalty, and it's possible that the commissioner could waive it because you're so close to the expiration date. So it's not a definite you're going to owe money, but I can't give you a definitive they'll waiver it either. We're kind of in a precarious position where we're storing stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
If they got a buyer, we have to relinquish it, and then they can pursue the sale.
Okay, so are they asking us to relinquish it?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Hamry?
I'm going to put on my Captain Obvious hat here. If we do relinquish it, whatever happens on the town side, the buyer follows through, the plans change, whatever happens, it doesn't move in a direction other than staying under the town purview. We don't get it back. We don't have it would have to go through the town process to have the town council vote to give it back to us or nothing. How does that work?
Once you relinquish it, it's no longer yours. It doesn't come back.
And in the conversation we had, or in the presentation you gave about the status of the current elementary schools, I'm not a mathematician. I don't do the numbers, but it seems like that building may be useful for the purposes of, if not more storage, for the purposes of a redesign, reorg, whatever, however that might shape out. And we wouldn't have that available in the event that we needed it at that point.
I wouldn't go that far because in order for that building to be reutilized, it would require some maintenance. So I'm not 100% confident to say, yes, we would be able to use it for X, Y, and Z, because I don't definitively know what kind of work would have to go into that. It's an old building, and it does have its share of issues. Right now, it's not, students aren't in there, so it's a little bit different threshold.
Does that not, I'm sorry to interrupt, but does that not fall under the town's responsibility to maintain it if it's having maintenance issues?
Yeah, but I think it's a bigger question of how much are we going to put into this place, and are we really going to use it, or do we sell it to a potential suitor who I don't know who that is, or at least not comfortable saying what I think I heard. That's not our place. Like, if we sell it, we don't get the money for it.
Right, and I'm only very cautious about this only because in budget speak, if you have a budget surplus, you have to give it back. In my experiences, not necessarily related to Board of Ed's information, but more working in the government contract side. If you have a surplus, you have to, it goes back, and you don't get approved for more. So at the end of the year, everybody's panicking to get rid of as much of their surplus budget as possible to justify their next budget. So I don't want to put us in a situation where we give up something that we end up needing later on if there's no way that we could actually get it back without possibly not.
I'm glad you brought that up. Maybe it's more relevant for the previous discussion, but they're all kind of linked. I 100% understand what you're saying, because we used to have to do that. So if we knew we had X amount of money at the end of the year, we used to just run off and say, start buying stuff for next year, spend it, because if not, we have to give it back. About 6 years ago, or maybe a little bit more than that, no, about almost 6 years ago, we started having conversations, because ultimately the person we were giving the money back were the ones who sit here on Monday night, and said, do you want us to just go use that money and buy things because we don't want to give it back, or can we work together in order to for the betterment of the community as a whole? So there are a lot of projects that have happened in town that the board has contributed to and the town has contributed to because of that agreement. One of them is the new facilities at Enfield High School on the athletic complex. So our new turf, nobody had that as a project. The town and the board came together and said, if we can contribute X amount to this and you can contribute X amount, we can get to that number and fix the turf. Fix some of the, looking at the drainage issues, things that weren't included in the referendum. Because the old days was, well, we have X amount left, hurry up and get rid of it, because we're not going to be able to keep it. This is a little bit different. This is a facility that we're strictly using for storage. I don't want to inhibit the town from their ability to possibly sell it, because, to be quite frank, I don't have see a use for it for us right now beyond storage. In order for us to repurpose that building, that's a greater conversation with the town about putting more funding into roofs and things like that for a facility that we don't necessarily have a full use for. So it was requested to have the board relinquish it. The town can explore what their options are. One of the things we were told was, in the event they were to sell the property and we don't have a clear answer as to whether or not there's a bill due to the state, that would be factored into the selling price of the property. Again, it's not our place to say who's planning on buying or what they're going to sell it for, because they don't want me dancing in their box. So I have no issue with the board if they were to decide to turn it back and let them explore. I trust the manager that she knows what she's doing, and if she thinks she has a buyer, she's got one.
I appreciate the answer and the analogy at the end there. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Roll call?
Mrs. Acree?
Yes.
Dr. Calvin?
Yes.
Mrs. Cushman?
Yes.
Mr. Hamry?
Yes.
Mr. LeBlanc? Yes. Mr. Ungary?
Yes.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item 12, board committee reports. The curriculum committee is meeting on this Monday to go over additions for the program of studies. The finance committee, Dr. Kalnin?
No report.
Okay. The policy committee is meeting on January 31st, which is next Tuesday. One of the things I want to suggest to our Board of Ed is the best time to make a change to a policy or suggest a policy or to amend a policy would be at your first reading. So the policies are in the board packets, and perhaps you guys, when we all caucus, we can talk about the policies so that if we want to make amendments or word changes, the best place to do it is the first reading. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there. And if you have any specific questions, it would come at that first reading. So I just kind of wanted to go over that. The leadership committee met yesterday, as a matter of fact, and our next meeting is scheduled for February 13th. The Joint Facilities Committee is going to be meeting this Thursday at 6:30, I think, 6:30? Is it 6:30? I think it's 6:30. Yeah, I think it's 6:30. The JFK Building Committee, Mr. Ryder is not here. The Joint Security Committee is along with Mr. Ryder. The Enfield Mental Health and Wellness Group,
No report.
nothing to report. Enfield Cultural Arts Commission, Mr. Hamry.
So thank you. I'm going to try to make this quick, but a few things I want to touch on. The ECAC is working with the two of the members of the ECAC are going to be judges. I did mention it at the last meeting, but for the contest, the poetry contest that happens this Thursday at JFK, there's going to be two different members of the ECAC that are going to be participating as judges in that contest. It's the Poetry in Enfield contest. It's a poetry recitation event and contest sponsored by the English and World Language departments of the Enfield Public Schools. And again, this coming Thursday at JFK. Heritage Fair Planning Committee meeting is happening tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken, happening virtually. I'm going to try to attend that if I can. And my apologies to them in advance if I can't, because personal commitments have been ramping up as they tend to do. I want to highlight that Valley Rep Theater is getting their next show moving forward, and they're having auditions February 7th at Asnuntuck for their show Holidazed, written by Bailey Morse. It's happening February 7th at 6:30 p.m. again at Asnuntuck in the auditorium. I want to throw out some congratulations to Opera House players on their wins for their Broadway World Regional Awards for The Little Mermaid. They did win some accolades for their young audience production category of that show. And they've got upcoming productions of Bridges of Madison County happening this next month in February, as well as School of Hard Rock coming up and The Hunchback of Notre Dame in the upcoming year. One of the things that the Opera House players, as you may know, I'm very familiar with because I've worked with them for so many years, doing sound, doing set build, doing all things with the production. They've been in town since 2018, and they've made every possible effort to put on their best performances, as shown by the fact that they're getting recognized for their Little Mermaid production. I was over there at the Annex this past weekend as I helped them move some of their set pieces and do some set build, some prop build, things like that. And I was rather disappointed to see that the curtains on the side of the stage, stage left, stage right, which are in technical terms called the legs of the stage, they're the curtains that block the things that happen backstage. those curtains were taken down with no replacement. So it takes a enormous amount of resources to put those back in place. Granted, they were in terrible shape. They were never in good shape from the time that Opera House players started using the auditorium over there. But for the upcoming show, it's a considerable factor in having to plan for their production that was not anticipated. And if there's a way that we have I know we have a town council in the room here, appreciate your attending, ma'am. If there's a way that we could get some attention to put those legs back up in the wings of the stage over there, that would significantly relieve some of the pressure that was unanticipated and avoidable. Anyway, I do appreciate the time, and I think that's it. I apologize. There might have been something else, but if there is, I'll regret it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hamry. Item 13, approval of minutes. Motion to approve the regular Board of Ed meeting minutes from January 10th, 2023.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Ungary, second by Mr. Hamry. Show of hands. Approval of accounts and payroll.
No report.
Correspondence and communications. I happened to look at our calendar. So our next meeting is on Valentine's Day. But I just wanted to let you know, unless there's a snowstorm, right? I just wanted to let you know, so the policy meeting's on the 31st, and then we'll actually have 2 weeks to review those policies in between. Because January is a longer month, we're kind of thrown off in our meeting dates, so we have 2 weeks before our next meeting, or even longer. So our next meeting is on Valentine's Day. So I kind of just wanted to let my board members know.
Madam Chair, I just want to make sure you're just not giving us a pass to not be here on that Valentine's Day. We have to be here. Just checking.
Yes. Again, unless it snows and we have to reschedule. Okay. Do we have a need for executive session? We do not. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Hamry, seconded by Ms. Acree. All in favor? Thank you. Have a great night.